For nearly my entire life, I've been hauling cargo in this country for 15 years, and I thought I'd seen everything that could happen on these highways. The good, the bad, and the wrong. I've faced blizzards that turned highways into ice rinks, sandstorms that stripped the paint off tractor trailers, and fog so thick you couldn't even see your own truck's hood. I've seen enough accidents to make your stomach turn, dealt with selfish cops, and spent more nights in truck stops than I care to remember. But nothing prepared me for what I experienced in the Mojave Desert in the summer of 2017. In that moment, darkness completely engulfs you, and the silence rings in your ears like a constant hum. It gnaws at your insides. This particular run started like any other. I was working for a mid-sized logistics company out of Riverside, California, hauling appliances mostly. Refrigerators, washing machines, dryers, the kind of stuff that people order online and expect to show up on their doorstep in perfect condition. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills, and in this economy, that was more than a lot of folks could say. The load I was carrying that night was headed for a distribution center just outside of Phoenix, Arizona. Standard overnight haul, the kind I'd done 100 times before without giving it much thought. I left Riverside around 8 in the evening, right as the sun was setting and painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if I wasn't too tired to appreciate them. I'd already put in a full day's work before this run, doing local deliveries around the Inland Empire, and my body was reminding me of every one of my 43 years. My back ached. My eyes felt like they had sand in them, and there was a dull throb behind my temples that promised to turn into a full-blown headache if I didn't stay hydrated. But the money was too good to pass up, and I needed every dime I could scrape together. My daughter Emily was starting college in the fall, and even with her scholarships and financial aid, the costs were adding up faster than I could save. The first hour of the drive was easy enough. I took Interstate 10 east, merging into the flow of evening traffic heading out of the Los Angeles metro area. Cars and trucks surrounded me on all sides, their headlights and taillights creating rivers of light that stretched to the horizon. I had my radio tuned to a country station out of San Bernardino, listening to songs about heartbreak and drinking that all sounded the same after a while. The cab of my truck was warm and comfortable, and I had a thermos of coffee wedged into the cup holder next to me, still hot from the gas station where I'd filled it up. As I drove further east, the traffic started to thin out. The suburbs gave way to desert, and the lights of civilization became fewer and farther between. This was the part of the drive I usually enjoyed, when the chaos of the city was behind me and I could settle into the rhythm of the road. There's something almost meditative about long-distance trucking when conditions are right. Just you, the truck, and the endless miles of asphalt stretching out ahead. No boss looking over your shoulder, no customers complaining, no phones ringing, just the road. But that night, something felt off from the start. Maybe it was the exhaustion catching up with me, or maybe it was some kind of animal instinct picking up on danger I couldn't yet see. Either way, I couldn't shake this feeling of unease that settled over me like a heavy blanket. I kept checking my mirrors more often than usual, scanning the road ahead for anything out of the ordinary. Nothing jumped out at me, but the feeling persisted, gnawing at the edges of my consciousness. By the time I crossed into the open desert, the sun had fully set and darkness had fallen like a curtain. This is where the real problem became apparent. My headlights, which I'd been meaning to replace for months, were barely cutting through the darkness. They'd been getting dimmer gradually, so slowly that I hadn't really noticed until I was out here in the middle of nowhere with nothing but my weak beams to light the way. In the city or on well-lit highways, the difference wasn't that noticeable. But out here, where there were no streetlights, no buildings, no other sources of illumination, it became glaringly obvious that I was driving half blind. I cursed myself for putting off the repair. It was always something with this damn truck. The maintenance costs ate into my profits like termites chewing through wood, and every time I thought I had everything in good working order, something else would break down. Last month it was the transmission making funny noises. The month before that, the refrigeration unit for temperature-controlled loads decided to quit in the middle of a heat wave. And now the headlights, which should have been a simple fix, were leaving me squinting into darkness and hoping I didn't hit something I couldn't see. The highway stretched out before me, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the desert landscape. During the day, the Mojave has a stark beauty to it. The rock formations, the Joshua trees, the way the mountains rise up in the distance with their layers of sediment visible like pages in a history book. But at night, all of that disappears. At night, the Mojave becomes a void, an absence of light so complete that it feels like you're driving through the emptiness of space itself. I had to squint constantly, straining my eyes to make out where the road ended and the shoulder began. The white lines marking the lanes were my only guide, and even those seemed to fade in and out of visibility as my inadequate headlights struggled to illuminate them. Every few minutes, I'd blink hard and rub my eyes, trying to clear the fatigue that made everything seem slightly blurry around the edges. This was dangerous. I knew that. Any trucker with half a brain could see that driving in these conditions was asking for trouble. More than once, I seriously considered pulling over and calling it a night. There were rest stops along this route, places where I could park the truck and catch a few hours of sleep. I could wait until sunrise, when visibility wouldn't be an issue, and I could make the rest of the drive safely. It would only delay my delivery by a few hours, and any reasonable dispatcher would understand, given the circumstances. Safety first, right? That's what they always told us in training. But I didn't pull over. I kept driving, and I've spent the last few years wondering if that was the biggest mistake of my life. The truth is, I needed the money too badly to waste time sitting around waiting for the sun to come up. Every hour I spent parked was an hour I wasn't getting paid for, and with Emily's tuition looming over me like a dark cloud, I couldn't afford to be precious about things like ideal driving conditions. Besides, the highway was mostly straight through this section. How hard could it be to follow a straight road, even with poor visibility? That's the kind of logic that gets people killed. But I didn't think about it that way at the time. I was focused on the destination, on getting this delivery done so I could pick up the next one and keep the money flowing. That's the trap of this job, really. You're always thinking about the next load, the next paycheck, the next bill that needs paying. You stop thinking about the present moment. Stop paying attention to the warning signs that something isn't right. The radio had lost its signal about 20 minutes ago, replaced by static that hissed and crackled through the speakers. I turned it off rather than listen to that noise, and now the only sounds were the rumble of the engine and the whisper of tires on asphalt. The silence was actually worse than the static, in a way. It gave me too much time to think, too much space for my mind to wander into dark corners. I thought about Emily, about how proud I was of her for getting into college, and how terrified I was that I wouldn't be able to give her the opportunities she deserved. I thought about my ex-wife, about how she'd been right when she said this job would consume me, that I'd choose the road over my family. I thought about my father, who'd been a trucker before me, and had died of a heart attack behind the wheel of his rig when he was 55. Would that be my fate too? Dying out here on some lonely highway, another statistic, another cautionary tale for young drivers. These were the kinds of thoughts that plagued me during the long hours of solitude. Depression, maybe, or just the natural result of too much time alone with your own mind. The isolation of long-haul trucking isn't something people talk about much, but it's real and it's brutal. Sure, you meet people at truck stops and loading docks, have brief conversations with dispatchers and dock workers, but most of your life is spent alone in the cab of your truck, watching the world go by through a windshield. I shook my head, trying to clear away the dark thoughts. I needed to focus on the road, on making it through this night in one piece. I reached down to the center console, feeling around for one of the energy drinks I always kept stocked. My hand found nothing but empty cup holders and wadded-up napkins. Damn it. I'd forgotten to restock after my last run. The thermos of coffee was long since empty, and I didn't have anything else to keep me alert. This was bad. I could feel the exhaustion creeping up on me, making my eyelids heavy and my reactions slower. The smart thing to do would be to pull over immediately and get some rest, but we'd already established that I wasn't making smart decisions tonight. Instead, I started slapping my own face, pinching my arms, anything to generate some pain and shock my system into staying awake. It worked, but only temporarily. After a few minutes, the exhaustion would come creeping back, even stronger than before. The highway continued its straight path through the desert, and I continued following it, fighting against my own body's desperate need for sleep. I started talking to myself, narrating what I was seeing even though there was nothing to see. Road ahead clear, staying in my lane, checking mirrors. Everything normal. The sound of my own voice helped a little, made me feel less alone, less likely to drift off into unconsciousness. That's when I saw the first sign that this night was about to take a turn for the worse. In the distance, maybe a quarter-mile ahead, I could make out a shape on the road. At first, I thought it might be my imagination, or maybe a shadow cast by the mountains in the distance. But as I got closer, it became clear that there was definitely something there. Something that didn't belong on an empty highway in the middle of the night. My first thought was that it might be an animal. Coyotes, deer, even wild horses sometimes wandered onto the roads out here, and hitting one at highway speed could cause serious damage to the truck, not to mention kill the animal. I'd hit a deer once, years ago in Montana, and the memory of that sickening impact still haunted me. The blood, the broken body, the knowledge that I'd snuffed out a life through no fault of my own, but simply by being in the wrong place at the wrong time. I eased off the accelerator, letting the truck slow down as I tried to get a better look at what was ahead. My pathetic headlights weren't giving me much information, just vague shapes and shadows that could have been anything. As I got closer, maybe 50 yards away, I realized it wasn't an animal. It was a vehicle, a car, sitting in the middle of the road with its hazard lights blinking slow and steady. Relief washed over me. Not an animal, just someone with car trouble. Probably just needed a jump start, or maybe had a flat tire and was waiting for help to arrive. This was something I could handle. A straightforward situation with a straightforward solution. I'd help them out, get them on their way, and continue with my delivery. Good karma, right? But as I got even closer, close enough that even my dim headlights could show me the details, I felt that relief evaporate and get replaced by confusion. The car wasn't pulled off to the side of the road like you'd expect from someone having car trouble. It was positioned right in the middle of the highway, straddling the double yellow line that divided the lanes. And the passenger door was hanging wide open, swinging slightly in what little breeze there was. I slowed down even more, my foot hovering over the brake pedal as my brain tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Why would someone park right in the middle of the road? Why was the door open? Where was the driver? The hazard lights continued their rhythmic blinking, and I could hear them now too, that steady tick-tick-tick sound cutting through the silence of the desert night. Every instinct I had was screaming at me that something was wrong here, that this wasn't a normal breakdown situation. But I was tired, so tired, and my judgment was probably impaired by exhaustion. Maybe there was a simple explanation. Maybe the driver had gotten disoriented. had some kind of medical emergency, parked where they did because they were confused or in pain. Maybe they'd wandered off looking for help, not thinking clearly. I brought my truck to a complete stop about 30 feet from the car, close enough to see it clearly but far enough that I could maneuver around it if needed. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, trying to decide what to do. The smart thing would probably be to call 911, report an abandoned vehicle, and let the authorities handle it. But cell phone coverage out here was spotty at best, and I wasn't even sure I could get a signal. The car was a newer model Ford Fusion, red paint that looked almost black in the darkness except where my headlights hit it. It appeared to be in good condition. No visible damage, no flat tires, nothing that would obviously explain why it was sitting here in the middle of nowhere. The engine wasn't running, but the keys must have been in the ignition for the hazard lights to be working. I made my decision. I'd check it out quickly, see if anyone needed help, and if I couldn't figure out what was going on, I'd drive to the next town and report it. Simple. Straightforward. Nothing to worry about. I put the truck in park and killed the engine, suddenly very aware of how quiet it was out here. The silence was oppressive, heavy, broken only by that steady ticking of the hazard lights and the faint creaking of my truck as it cooled down. I grabbed my flashlight from the door pocket, tested it to make sure it worked, and opened my door. The desert air hit me immediately, warm and still. There wasn't even a hint of breeze, which was unusual for this time of night. Normally, the temperature dropped after sunset and the air would start moving, but tonight it felt like I'd stepped into a room with no ventilation. The warmth pressed against my skin, and I could feel sweat starting to form on my forehead despite the lack of physical exertion. I climbed down from the cab, my boots crunching on the gritty asphalt, and started walking toward the Ford. Every step felt surreal, like I was moving through a dream or watching myself from a distance. The hazard lights continued their blinking, casting brief flashes of amber light across the scene. Tick, tick, tick. The sound seemed louder now that I was outside my truck, almost aggressive in its regularity. As I approached the car, I kept my head on a swivel, scanning the desert on both sides of the road for any sign of the driver. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating scrub brush and rocks, but no people. Where the hell was the driver? You don't just abandon your car in the middle of a highway and wander off into the desert. That's how people die out here. Dehydration, heat exposure, getting lost and never being found. The Mojave doesn't forgive mistakes. I reached the car and stopped at the open passenger door, shining my light inside. The interior was clean, almost pristine. The seats were leather, the dashboard free of clutter except for a phone mount attached to the air vent. There was a half-empty bottle of water in the cup holder and a phone charger plugged into the power port, but no phone attached to it. The keys were indeed in the ignition, turned to the accessories position to keep the hazards running, but with the engine off. I walked around to the driver's side, checking the back seat as I went. Empty. No one hiding, no one sleeping, no one unconscious. I opened the driver's door and leaned in, looking for any clues about who owned this car or where they might have gone. The glove compartment was closed, and I debated whether to open it. That felt like crossing a line somehow, going through someone's private property without permission. But what if there was information in there that could help me find them? I popped open the glove compartment. Inside was the usual stuff: registration, insurance card, owner's manual. I pulled out the registration and read it by flashlight. The car was registered to a Michael Patterson with an address in Henderson, Nevada. The registration was current, no red flags there. I put it back and closed the compartment, feeling like I'd invaded someone's privacy, but not sure what else I was supposed to do. I straightened up and looked around again, sweeping my flashlight beam across the desert in all directions. Nothing. No movement, no sounds except for those damn hazard lights ticking away. This was getting weirder by the minute, and I was starting to think I should just get back in my truck and call this in from the next town. But then I remembered the trunk. I hadn't checked the trunk yet. Maybe there was something in there that would explain this situation. Some piece of equipment or cargo that would make sense of why the car was abandoned like this. Or maybe, and this thought made my stomach clench, maybe there was someone in the trunk. Maybe this was a kidnapping situation, or worse. I walked back around to the rear of the car, my mind now racing through increasingly dark scenarios. Human trafficking was a real problem on these desert highways. People disappeared out here all the time, and not all of them were victims of the elements. Some of them were taken, transported, sold. The thought made me sick, but I couldn't ignore the possibility. I tried the trunk release, but it wouldn't budge, locked. I went back to the driver's side, reached in and found the trunk release button on the door panel. I pressed it and heard a click, but when I went back to check, the trunk still wouldn't open. It was jammed somehow, stuck from the inside. My heart was pounding now, adrenaline starting to override the exhaustion that had been weighing me down. If someone was in there, if someone needed help, I had to get that trunk open. I went back to the rear seat, opened the door, and folded down the back seat to access the trunk from inside the car. The seat came down easily, and I shined my flashlight into the trunk space. What I saw stopped me cold. 3 large black garbage bags, the heavy-duty contractor kind, stuffed full with something, and tied together with thick rope that had been wound around the trunk latch multiple times. That's why it wouldn't open from the outside. Someone had deliberately locked it from the inside, using the bags and rope to keep the trunk closed. My hands were shaking as I reached toward the bags. I had to know what was in them. Had to know if someone needed help, if there was something I could do. My fingers were maybe 6 inches from touching the nearest bag when the gunshot split the night. The sound was so loud, so impossibly loud in the silence of the desert, that my entire body jerked involuntarily. My head snapped up and cracked against the roof of the car with enough force to make me see stars. Pain exploded across my skull, bright and sharp, but the adrenaline surging through my system barely let me register it. I pulled back from the trunk so fast that I fell onto my ass on the asphalt, my flashlight clattering away and rolling under the car. For a split second, I just sat there, stunned and disoriented, my ears ringing from the gunshot. Then, survival instinct kicked in and I scrambled to my feet, not bothering to retrieve my flashlight. I had to get out of here. Had to get back to my truck. Had to move now before whoever had fired that shot decided to fire another one. I threw the keys onto the front seat of the Ford, not knowing why I did it, just operating on autopilot. Then I turned and ran toward my semi, my boots slapping against the pavement, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind me, I could hear a voice, male and rough, shouting something I couldn't make out over the pounding of my heart and the blood rushing in my ears. The voice was distant but getting closer, moving fast. "Hey! Hey! Stop!" I didn't stop. Didn't slow down. Didn't look back. I reached my truck and practically threw myself up into the cab, my hands fumbling for the door handle to slam it shut. I twisted the key in the ignition and the engine turned over once, twice, then died. No, 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 not now, not fucking now. "Come on, baby, come on," I muttered, turning the key again. The engine coughed, sputtered, and finally roared to life. I'd never been so happy to hear that sound in my entire life. I threw the truck into gear, my hand shaking so badly I almost knocked the shifter out of position. That's when I saw him. He was standing at the trunk of the Ford, illuminated by my headlights as I started to pull out. A short man, maybe 5'6", with a stocky build that suggested physical labor. Red hair, the color of rust, sticking out from under a faded baseball cap. He was wearing denim overalls over a dirty white t-shirt and brown work boots that came up to mid-shin. In his left hand he held a small camping shovel, the kind with a folding handle. In his right hand, held loosely at his side, was a hunting rifle. It looked old, maybe a lever-action Winchester or something similar, with a worn wooden stock. Our eyes met across the distance between us, and what I saw in his face wasn't what I expected. He didn't look angry or threatening or crazy. He looked worried. Genuinely, deeply worried. His eyes were wide, his mouth was slightly open, and his whole expression was one of almost desperate concern. Like I was the one doing something wrong, like I was the threat he needed to deal with. The moment lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Then my truck lurched forward, and I was moving, pulling past him, putting distance between us. In my side mirror, I saw him drop the shovel and start waving his hands over his head, his mouth moving as he shouted something else I couldn't hear. He took a few steps toward my truck, still waving, still yelling. I didn't stick around to hear what he had to say. I pressed down on the accelerator, pushing the semi faster than I should have on this stretch of road, not caring about speed limits or safety or anything except getting as far away from that scene as possible. The truck's engine protested at the sudden demand for speed, but it responded, the speedometer needle climbing past 60, past 70. My hands were locked on the steering wheel in a death grip, my knuckles white, my entire body rigid with tension. I kept checking the mirrors every few seconds, half expecting to see him chasing after me on foot, even though I knew that was impossible. The Ford and the man receded into the distance behind me, the hazard lights getting smaller and smaller until they disappeared entirely, swallowed by the darkness. I drove for 5 minutes straight without letting up on the gas, my eyes darting between the road ahead and the mirrors, searching for any sign of pursuit. The highway remained empty behind me, just darkness and asphalt stretching out into infinity. Maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe he'd let me go. Maybe I was going to make it out of this after all. Then I saw the headlights. They appeared in my rearview mirror like eyes opening in the dark, distant at first but growing rapidly larger. Someone was coming up behind me, fast. Way too fast. I watched those headlights eat up the distance between us, and I just knew, it was him. The red Ford Fusion, no longer abandoned on the highway but in pursuit. No, 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 I heard myself saying, my voice sounding strange and high-pitched in the confines of the cab. Come on, not this. Please, not this. I fumbled for my phone with one hand while keeping the other on the wheel, nearly dropping it twice before I managed to unlock it. 3 bars of signal, thank God. I dialed 911, my finger jabbing at the screen, and held the phone to my ear. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Each ring felt like an eternity. 911, what's your emergency? The voice was female, calm and professional, and I've never been so relieved to hear another human being in my life. I need help, I said, the words tumbling out of my mouth almost too fast to understand. I'm on Interstate 10, eastbound, somewhere in the Mojave. There's a man chasing me. He has a gun. He fired a shot at me. I'm in a semi-truck and he's in a red Ford Fusion and he's right behind me. Sir, I need you to slow down and tell me exactly where you are. I don't know exactly where I am. I'm in the desert, on I-10, heading toward Arizona. He's right behind me. He's been chasing me for miles. Okay, sir, I understand you're scared, but I need you to stay calm. Can you see any mile markers or exit signs? I scanned the road ahead, but there was nothing visible in the darkness. No signs, no markers, nothing to tell me exactly where I was. No, I can't see anything. It's too dark and my headlights are bad, but he's gaining on me. Please, You have to send someone. We're triangulating your position now, sir. Can you describe the vehicle that's following you? Red Ford Fusion, newer model. The driver is a white male, short, red hair, wearing overalls. He has a rifle. Behind me, the headlights were getting closer. I could see them filling my side mirrors now, bright and unrelenting. Then I heard it. The horn. Honk, honk, honk. 3 long blasts that seemed to shake the entire cab of my truck. He's honking at me. He wants me to stop. Do not stop, sir. Keep driving and stay on the line with me. We have units en route to your location. The Ford pulled up right on my bumper, so close I couldn't see its hood anymore. Just the glare of its headlights reflecting off my trailer. The horn blasted again, longer this time. A sustained noise that drilled into my skull like a physical thing. Honk. Make him stop. Please make him stop. Sir, I know this is frightening, but you need to keep driving. Don't try to outrun him. Just maintain your speed and wait for our officers to arrive. They're coming. Easy for her to say. She wasn't the one being chased through the desert by an armed man in the middle of the night. But I tried to do what she said, keeping my speed steady around 75, watching those headlights in my mirror, and praying that the police would show up before something worse happened. The pursuit continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 or 15 minutes. The Ford stayed right on my tail, occasionally honking, but making no attempt to pass me or force me off the road. This was almost worse than if he'd tried something aggressive. The waiting, the not knowing what he was going to do, was eating away at my sanity. "Where are the police?" I asked, my voice cracking. "How long until they get here?" "They're very close now, sir. Just a few more minutes." The Ford suddenly swerved out from behind me, pulling into the left lane. My heart jumped into my throat. This was it. He was going to pull alongside me, point that rifle out his window and blow my head off. I'd die out here in the desert, just another victim of road violence, another trucker who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But he didn't pull alongside me. Instead, he accelerated hard and shot past my truck, cutting back into my lane with maybe 10 feet to spare. Then he hit his brakes hard. I saw the brake lights flare bright red, saw the Ford decelerating rapidly right in front of me, and I had maybe 2 seconds to react. I slammed on my own brakes, feeling the entire truck shudder and protest as the tires fought for grip on the asphalt. The anti-lock system kicked in, causing the brake pedal to pulse under my foot. The gap between my front bumper and his rear bumper shrank rapidly. 50 feet, 30 feet, 20, I was going to hit him. There was no way to stop in time. The weight of the trailer was pushing me forward, momentum demanding that we make contact. I braced myself for the impact, my teeth clenched, my hands locked on the wheel. 10 feet, 5 feet. Then I saw them, flashing red and blue lights ahead, coming toward us from the opposite direction. A police car, or maybe 2, I couldn't tell in my panic. The most beautiful sight I'd ever seen. The Ford's brake lights went out. He punched the accelerator and swerved hard to the right, leaving the highway entirely and bouncing off into the desert. I watched in my mirror as he disappeared into the darkness, his taillights visible for a few seconds before the terrain hid him from view. He was gone. I eased off the brakes and brought the truck to a gradual stop on the shoulder, my entire body shaking so badly I could barely control my limbs. The police car that had been approaching crossed the median and pulled up behind me, its lights still flashing. A second car appeared from the direction I'd been heading and pulled up in front of me, boxing me in. Sir, are you there?" The 911 operator was still on the line, her voice tinny through the phone speaker. "Yeah," I managed to croak out. "Yeah, I'm here. The police are here. He's gone. He drove off into the desert." "That's good, sir. You're safe now." The officers will take care of everything." I ended the call and just sat there for a moment, staring at nothing, trying to process what had just happened. My heart was still racing, my shirt was soaked with sweat, and I could feel the adrenaline starting to wear off, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion that made me feel like I'd aged 10 years in the last hour. A knock on my driver's side window made me jump. A police officer was standing there, a young guy with a crew cut and a serious expression. I rolled down the window. "Sir, are you injured?" he asked. I shook my head. "No. Scared shitless, but not hurt." "I need you to step out of the vehicle, please. We're going to need to get a statement from you." I climbed down from the cab on legs that felt like jelly, my boots hitting the pavement with less steadiness than I would have liked. Another officer, this one older with gray hair and a weathered face, was standing by the front of my truck with his hand resting on his service weapon. The younger officer pulled out a notepad. "Can you tell me what happened tonight?" And so I told him everything. The abandoned Ford in the middle of the road, the open passenger door, the bags in the trunk, the gunshot, the man with the rifle, the chase. I spoke quickly, the words tumbling out in a disorganized rush, and the officer had to ask me to slow down multiple times so he could take proper notes. When I finished, he looked at his notes, then back at me. "And you said the vehicle was located approximately 20 miles back?" "I guess. I don't know exactly. I wasn't really paying attention to the mile markers. But yeah, somewhere back there." "And the driver, the man with the gun, you got a good look at him?" "Yeah, short guy, red hair, wearing overalls and work boots. He had a shovel and a rifle." The officer wrote this down, then looked up at me. "And he chased you for how long?" "I don't know, 15 minutes, 20, it felt like forever." The older officer had been listening to this exchange, and now he walked over. "Did he try to run you off the road or shoot at you during the pursuit?" "No, he just followed me, honking his horn and trying to get me to stop." The two officers exchanged a look that I couldn't quite read. "Okay," the younger one said. "Here's what's going to happen. We're going to take your statement, get your contact information, and send you on your way. We'll have units respond to the location where you found the vehicle and investigate the scene. What about the guy? He drove off into the desert. You should go after him now, before he gets away." The older officer shook his head. "Sir, we don't have any four-wheel drive units in this immediate area, and pursuing someone into the desert at night is dangerous for everyone involved. We'll establish a perimeter and coordinate a search at first light." "But he could be getting away right now. He could be destroying evidence or—" "Sir," the officer interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. "I understand your frustration, but we have protocols we have to follow. The best thing you can do right now is answer our questions as completely as possible, so we have all the information we need to conduct our investigation." I wanted to argue, wanted to insist that they do something right now, but I could see it was pointless. They'd already made up their minds. So I stood there on the side of the highway and answered their questions, gave them my contact information, and watched as they took photos of my truck from various angles. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was probably only 30 minutes, they told me I was free to go. The younger officer handed me a card with a case number on it. "If you think of anything else, anything at all that might be relevant, give us a call at that number. Someone will be in touch if we need any additional information." I took the card and nodded, too tired to say anything else. I climbed back into my truck, started the engine, and pulled back onto the highway. In my rearview mirror, I watched the police lights grow smaller and smaller until they disappeared entirely. The rest of the drive to Phoenix was a blur. I was operating on pure autopilot, my body going through the motions while my mind was still back there on that dark stretch of highway, trying to make sense of what had happened. Who was that man? What was in those bags? Why did he chase me? The questions went around and around in my head, like a hamster on a wheel, never reaching any satisfying conclusions. I made my delivery in Phoenix at just past 6 in the morning. The sun rising over the desert and painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that would have been beautiful if I'd been in any state of mind to appreciate them. The warehouse workers noticed something was off about me. I could tell from the way they kept glancing at me and whispering to each other, but nobody said anything. They just unloaded my trailer, had me sign the paperwork, and sent me on my way. I should have found a motel and gotten some sleep. That would have been the smart, responsible thing to do. But I couldn't face the thought of lying in a dark room with nothing but my thoughts for company. So instead, I headed to a truck stop on the outskirts of the city. I needed to be around people, needed the noise and activity to drown out the memories of the previous night. The truck stop was one of those big ones that caters to long-haul drivers, with a full restaurant, showers, a small convenience store, and rows of parking spaces for semis. I pulled into a spot, killed the engine, and just sat there for a while staring at nothing. My phone rang. The dispatcher. I'd completely forgotten to check in after making my delivery. "Hey Frank, got your signature on the Phoenix delivery. Everything go okay?" "Yeah, fine. All good." "You sound like hell. You feeling all right?" I almost told him everything right then. Almost unloaded the whole crazy story about the abandoned car and the man with the rifle and the chase through the desert. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the fear that he wouldn't believe me, or that he'd think I was losing my mind, or that he'd decide I was too much of a liability and let me go. "Just tired," I said instead. "Long night. Well, get some rest. I've got another load for you tomorrow afternoon, picking up in Tucson and heading to San Diego. Easy run, good money." "Sounds good. I'll be ready." I ended the call and climbed out of the truck. My legs were stiff from hours of sitting, and I had to hold on to the door for a moment while the blood flow returned to normal. Once I was steady, I made my way into the truck stop, the automatic doors sliding open with a pneumatic hiss. The restaurant was about half full, mostly truckers like me, along with a few families who were probably doing road trips across the country. The smell of coffee and bacon and pancakes hit me as soon as I walked in, and I realized I was starving. I hadn't eaten anything since yesterday afternoon, before I'd started the run that had turned into a nightmare. I found a booth in the corner and slid into it, positioning myself so I could see the door. I didn't want anyone sneaking up on me. Didn't want to be surprised. A waitress appeared almost immediately, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a professional smile. "Coffee?" she asked, already pulling a pot from behind her back. "Please, and I'll take the biggest breakfast you have." She poured the coffee, took my order, and disappeared back toward the kitchen. I wrapped my hands around the mug, absorbing its warmth, and took a sip. It was terrible coffee, burned and bitter, but I didn't care. It was hot and it had caffeine, and that was all that mattered. I pulled out my phone and did something I probably shouldn't have. I searched for news about incidents on Interstate 10 in the Mojave Desert. I wasn't sure what I expected to find. Maybe a story about the abandoned car, or about the man with the rifle. Something that would validate what I'd experienced and prove it wasn't just some exhaustion-induced hallucination. But there was nothing. No news stories, no alerts, nothing. It was like the whole thing had never happened. I expanded my search, looking for any mentions of Michael Patterson from Henderson, Nevada, the name on the car's registration. Still, nothing relevant came up. Just some social media profiles that might or might not have been the same person. The waitress returned with my food, a massive plate piled high with eggs, bacon, sausage, hash browns, and pancakes. I thanked her and dug in, not tasting anything, just shoveling food into my mouth mechanically. I needed the calories, needed the fuel to keep functioning. As I ate, I thought about calling Emily. I wanted to hear my daughter's voice, wanted that connection to normalcy and safety in the life I'd built. But it was still early, and she'd be asleep. And what would I even say to her? "Hey, honey, just wanted to let you know I almost got killed by a crazy man in the desert last night." No, better to keep it to myself. I finished eating and paid my bill, leaving a generous tip because the waitress had been nice, and I felt like spreading some good karma around after the night I'd had. Then I went back to my truck, climbed into the sleeper berth, and tried to get some rest. Sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those garbage bags in the trunk. Every time I started to drift off, I jerked awake, my heart pounding, convinced I'd heard a gunshot. After about 2 hours of this, I gave up and just lay there staring at the ceiling of the sleeper, watching the shadows move as other trucks pulled in and out of the parking lot. My phone buzzed, a text message from an unknown number. My stomach clenched as I picked it up and read it. "This is Officer Martinez from last night. Just wanted to update you that we located the vehicle. It had been moved from the position you described, but we found it about 15 miles west of where you said. Vehicle was empty, no sign of the driver, no garbage bags or rope in the trunk. Investigation is ongoing. Thank you for your cooperation." I read the message 3 times, my confusion growing with each pass. The vehicle had been moved? The bags were gone? What the hell did that mean? I called the number, and Officer Martinez answered on the 3rd ring. "This is Martinez." "Yeah, hi, this is Frank Morrison. You just sent me a text about the Ford Fusion?" "Right, yes. Did you have any questions about the update?" "What do you mean the bags were gone? There were 3 garbage bags in the trunk, tied together with rope." "I saw them." "Sir, when we processed the vehicle, the trunk was empty. Completely empty." "Are you certain about what you saw?" "Am I certain? Of course I'm certain. I was reaching for them when the guy fired his gun." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Mr. Morrison, I'm not saying you didn't see something, but there's no physical evidence of what you're describing. No bags, no rope, nothing. Then he came back and removed them. After he chased me, he must have gone back and cleaned out the trunk. That's certainly possible. We're treating this as an active investigation. We've put out a bolo for the vehicle and the individual you described. If we locate him, we'll definitely have some questions." "If you locate him? You mean you haven't found him yet?" "No, sir, not yet, but we're working on it." I wanted to scream. I wanted to reach through the phone and shake this cop until he understood how serious this was. But I knew it wouldn't do any good. They were doing what they could with the information they had, and getting angry at them wasn't going to change anything. "Okay," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Thank you for the update. Please let me know if you find anything else." "Will do, Mr. Morrison. And sir, you did the right thing calling us. Whatever was going on out there last night, you potentially saved a life by not ignoring that abandoned vehicle." After we hung up, I sat in the sleeper berth and tried to make sense of this new information. The bags were gone. The man had obviously come back after chasing me off and removed whatever was in that trunk, which meant he'd had something to hide, something worth chasing a semi-truck for 20 miles to keep secret. What had been in those bags? The most obvious answer, the one that kept forcing its way into my mind no matter how much I tried to avoid it, was bodies. Dead bodies, chopped up and ready for disposal in the desert. The shovel made sense in that context too. He'd been digging a grave, or maybe multiple graves, and I'd stumbled onto his burial site at exactly the wrong time. But there were problems with that theory. The shovel had been too small for digging graves, just a little camping shovel that couldn't have moved much dirt. And the bags, while large, hadn't been big enough for full adult bodies. Maybe body parts, like my friends had suggested when I eventually told them this story, but that raised even more questions. How many people had he killed? Where had he killed them? Why dispose of them way out here in the middle of nowhere? The alternative theories weren't much better. Maybe he was a drug dealer, and those bags had been full of product. Maybe he was a thief, and he'd been burying stolen goods. Maybe he was involved in some kind of organized crime, and those bags contained evidence of something illegal. None of these explanations made me feel any better about the situation. Days passed, then weeks, then months, and I never heard anything more from the police. No follow-up calls, no requests for additional information, nothing. The case number on the card they'd given me might as well have been just random numbers for all the good it did. I called a few times, trying to get updates, but I was always told that the investigation was ongoing and they'd contact me if they had any news. Eventually, I had to accept that I'd probably never know the full story of what happened that night. The man with the red hair and the rifle had vanished into the desert like a ghost, taking his secrets with him. The abandoned Ford Fusion, registered to Michael Patterson of Henderson, Nevada, had been impounded and processed for evidence, but apparently nothing useful had been found. I tried to move on with my life. Kept driving, kept making deliveries, kept putting money away for Emily's college fund. But something had changed in me that night. I found myself becoming paranoid while driving, especially through desert areas, and especially at night. Every abandoned vehicle I passed made my heart rate spike. Every car that followed me for more than a few miles made me think of those headlights in my rearview mirror and that relentless horn honking. I started carrying a gun in my truck, a .357 revolver that I kept in the door pocket within easy reach. I told myself it was for protection, that after what I'd been through it only made sense to be prepared. But deep down, I knew it was more about feeling in control, about having some way to fight back if I ever found myself in a situation like that again. My buddies at the truck stops couldn't believe the story when I finally worked up the nerve to tell it. Most of them thought I was exaggerating, that the exhaustion and the bad lighting had made me imagine things being worse than they actually were. A few believed me, and they had their own theories about what had been in those bags. Bodies, drugs, money, stolen goods. Everyone had an opinion, but nobody could say for certain. You know what I think? My friend Dale said one night over beers at a truck stop in New Mexico. Dale was an old-timer, been driving since before I was born, and he'd seen and heard just about everything. I think you interrupted something you weren't supposed to see. And that guy, whoever he was, he panicked. That's why he chased you. He needed to know if you'd seen anything, if you're going to be a problem for him. So why didn't he try harder to stop me? Why not try to run me off the road or shoot out my tires or something? Dale shrugged. Maybe he realized that would just make things worse. Killing a trucker on a major highway, that's going to bring a lot of heat. Better to scare you off and hope you don't talk than go back and clean up the evidence. Well, it worked. The evidence is gone and he's free. For now, Dale said. But guys like that, they always slip up eventually. They get cocky, they make mistakes. Maybe he's already been caught for something else. Maybe he's in prison right now and doesn't even know you're still thinking about him. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But something told me Dale was wrong. That the man with the red hair and the rifle was still out there somewhere, doing whatever it was he'd been doing that night. And maybe one day some other trucker would stumble onto one of his burial sites and have to make the same choice I made. Run away and hope for the best, or try to help and risk becoming another victim. 3 years have passed since that night in the Mojave Desert. 3 years of driving the same highways, passing through the same areas, and always watching for a red Ford Fusion with a short man with red hair behind the wheel. 3 years of wondering what was in those garbage bags and whether I could have done something different. Something that might have led to answers instead of more questions. Emily finished her first year of college with a 3.8 GPA and made the dean's list. She's talking about going to law school now, wants to be a prosecutor and put criminals behind bars. I'm proud of her, prouder than I can put into words. But every time she talks about her career plans, I think about that night and wonder if the man who chased me will ever face prosecution for whatever he was doing out there in the dark. I still drive trucks for a living, still haul freight across the country, still spend more nights in the cab of my semi than I do in my apartment. But I've made some changes to how I operate. I replaced those dim headlights immediately after that night, upgraded to the brightest LED lights I could find. I keep my truck meticulously maintained now, never putting off repairs or service. I don't drive when I'm exhausted anymore, no matter how much money might be on the line. And I never, ever stop to investigate abandoned vehicles. That last one is important. I've passed maybe a dozen abandoned cars in the years since that night, and every single time I've driven right by and called it in from the next town or rest stop. I don't care if someone needs help. I don't care if it looks suspicious. I don't care if I might be the difference between life and death for someone. I learned my lesson about playing hero, about thinking I could handle whatever situation I might encounter out there in the lonely places. Some people might call that cowardice. They might say I have a moral obligation to help people in distress, that turning my back on someone who might need assistance makes me no better than the criminals I'm afraid of. Maybe they're right. I've thought about it a lot, turned it over in my mind during those long hours behind the wheel, and I still don't have a good answer. All I know is that I have a daughter who needs me around, and I can't help anyone if I'm dead or missing. The police never contacted me again after that initial update about finding the car empty. I called every few months for the first year, asking if there had been any progress on the investigation, but I always got the same answer. The case was still open, but there were no new leads. Eventually, I stopped calling. There didn't seem to be any point. I did my own research when I could, searching online for any news stories that might be connected to what I'd seen. Missing persons reports from Henderson, Nevada, unsolved murders in the Southwest, any crimes involving red Ford Fusions or short men with red hair. I found plenty of cases that could potentially be related, but nothing that was a clear match. The desert keeps its secrets, and the people who know how to use it can disappear as completely as if they'd never existed. One theory that I keep coming back to, the one that lets me sleep at night, is that maybe it wasn't bodies in those bags. Maybe it was something else, something illegal but not actively violent. Drug money, maybe, or contraband of some kind. The man could have been a courier or a dealer, burying his product or his profits out in the desert where nobody would find them. That would explain why he chased me, why he was so desperate to keep me from seeing what was in the trunk. It would also explain why he didn't try harder to actually hurt me. He just needed to scare me off and buy himself time to clean up. It's not a perfect theory. There are holes in it, things that don't quite add up. But it's better than the alternative, which is that I witnessed the beginning or the end of someone's murder and did nothing to stop it or bring the killer to justice. That thought is what wakes me up at night sometimes, sweating and gasping, my heart pounding in my chest. The thought that somewhere out there, maybe buried in the Mojave Desert or maybe disposed of in some other way, there's a body or bodies that nobody has found because I ran away instead of staying to investigate. I've told this story more times than I can count. At truck stops, at family gatherings, to anyone who'll listen, people's reactions vary. Some are fascinated, want to hear every detail multiple times. Some are skeptical, think I'm exaggerating or making the whole thing up. Some get angry, demand to know why I didn't do more, why I didn't fight back or chase the guy down myself. Everyone has an opinion about what I should have done differently. But they weren't there. They didn't see those garbage bags or hear that gunshot echoing across the desert. They didn't have to make split-second decisions with incomplete information while their adrenaline was spiking and their hands were shaking. It's easy to be brave when you're sitting in a diner with a cup of coffee, talking about something that happened to someone else. It's a lot harder when you're the one in danger, when you're the one who has to live with the consequences of your choices. Dale, my old trucker friend, died last year. Heart attack while he was sleeping in his truck at a rest stop in Texas. They found him in the morning, still in his bunk, like he'd just drifted off peacefully in his sleep. I went to his funeral, saw his wife and kids, listened to people talk about what a good man he was. And I thought about our conversation that night in New Mexico, about how he'd said guys like the one who chased me always slip up eventually. I hope he was right. I hope that somewhere, somehow, the man with the red hair and the rifle made a mistake. I hope he's in prison or dead, or at least no longer able to do whatever it was he was doing that night. But I don't know. I'll probably never know. And that uncertainty is its own kind of prison, one that I'll be living in for the rest of my life. I still drive through the Mojave Desert sometimes. It's impossible to avoid completely when you're hauling freight across the Southwest, but I do it during the day now, never at night. I watch the landscape roll by, the rocky outcroppings, and the scraggly vegetation and the mountains rising in the distance, and I wonder how many secrets it's keeping. How many graves, how many crimes, how many mysteries that will never be solved because the desert is too big and too empty and too good at swallowing up evidence. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I pull out my phone and look at news stories from the Southwest. I tell myself I'm not looking for anything specific, just keeping informed about what's happening in the areas where I drive. But really, I'm looking for him. Looking for some story about a short man with red hair being arrested for murder or drug trafficking or whatever it is he was actually doing. I want closure. I want to know that I did the right thing by running away, or that I did the wrong thing and need to live with that guilt, or something, anything that will let me put this behind me once and for all. But closure doesn't come. The desert keeps its secrets, and the man keeps his, and I keep driving. That's all I can do. Keep driving, keep making my deliveries, keep putting 1 mile behind me after another. The highway stretches out ahead of me, endless and unchanging. And somewhere out there, maybe still on these same roads, is a man with red hair and dark secrets and garbage bags full of things that nobody was ever meant to see. I wonder if he thinks about that night too. I wonder if he remembers the trucker who stumbled onto his scene and almost touched those bags before running away. Does he regret chasing me? Does he wish he'd handled it differently? Or was I just one more complication in a life full of complications? Just another person who got too close to something they shouldn't have seen? I'll never know the answers to these questions. The only thing I know for certain is that on a warm night in 2017, somewhere in the Mojave Desert on Interstate 10, something terrible was happening. And I drove away from it, leaving it behind in the darkness, unresolved and unexplained. I saved my own life that night, but I can't shake the feeling that I might have been able to save someone else's if I'd been braver, smarter, better prepared. That's the weight I carry now, every day, every mile. Not the memory of the chase or the gunshot or the man with the rifle, although those haunt me too. But the weight of not knowing, the burden of questions without answers, the guilt of wondering if my survival came at someone else's expense. It's a heavy weight, but it's mine to bear. I chose to get out of that truck and investigate that abandoned car. I chose to run when things got dangerous. I chose to drive away and let the police handle it, even though they never really handled anything. These were my choices, and I have to live with them. So I keep driving, keep watching the road, keep telling this story to anyone who'll listen. Maybe someday I'll get the answers I'm looking for. Maybe someday the truth about what was in those garbage bags will come to light, and I'll finally be able to put this behind me. Maybe someday I'll stop scanning every parking lot for red Ford Fusions and every crowd for short men with red hair. But until that day comes, if it ever does, I'm trapped in this limbo of unknowing. The highway stretches out before me, endless and full of possibility and danger in equal measure. And somewhere out there, in the darkness at the edges of the headlights, the desert keeps its secrets. I'm still driving, still watching, still wondering, and I probably always will be. I'm on the younger side for this industry, only been trucking for a little over 2 years, and people love to remind me of that fact. My Uncle Rick, my dispatcher Tommy, even the guys at the loading docks, they all have this way of looking at me like I'm some kid playing dress-up in a grown man's job. Maybe they're right. Maybe I should have stayed in school, finished my degree at Penn State, gotten some white-collar job that my parents could brag about at neighborhood barbecues. But life doesn't always work out the way you plan it, and sometimes the detours you take end up defining who you become. I dropped out halfway through my junior year. The official reason I gave everyone was financial, that the loans were piling up, and I couldn't justify the debt for a degree I wasn't even sure I wanted. That was part of it, sure, but the real reason was that I'd had a breakdown of sorts. The pressure, the expectations, the constant feeling that I was running on a treadmill that kept speeding up no matter how fast I ran, it all became too much. I started having panic attacks in class, couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't function, so I left, much to the disappointment of pretty much everyone who knew me. Trucking seemed like a good escape. It was honest work, decent pay, and most importantly, it was about as far from the academic pressure cooker as I could get. Nobody out here cared about my GPA or my test scores or my potential. They cared about whether I could deliver the load on time and in one piece. Simple, clear, achievable. The job itself turned out to be more complicated than I expected, though. Not the driving part, that was actually the easy part. It was the isolation that got to me. All those hours alone in the cab with nothing but my thoughts for company, that's when the demons I'd been running from would catch up with me. The self-doubt, the fear that I'd made a huge mistake, the nagging voice in my head that sounded suspiciously like my father telling me I was wasting my potential. You can't outrun your own mind. I learned that pretty quickly. This particular incident happened about 3 months into my career, when I was still green enough to make rookie mistakes but experienced enough to think I knew what I was doing. Dangerous combination, that. I was hauling a load from South Jersey to Lafayette, Indiana, a 12-hour drive that would have been manageable on its own. But I just completed an 8-hour run from Connecticut to Jersey, and instead of taking a break like a sane person would have, I decided to chain the 2 deliveries together. Get them both done, maximize my efficiency, impress the dispatcher with my work ethic. Classic overachiever behavior, the same kind of thinking that had led to my breakdown in college, but I wasn't self-aware enough to see the pattern yet. I left the warehouse in South Jersey around 8 in the evening, just as the sun was setting, and the mosquitoes were coming out in force. The load was nothing special, just standard freight, boxes of manufactured goods that needed to get from point A to point B. The truck was running well. I had a full tank of diesel, and the weather forecast was clear. Everything was pointing toward an easy, uneventful night of driving. The first few hours were fine. I took I-78 west through Pennsylvania, watching the landscape transition from suburban sprawl to farmland to the rolling hills of the Appalachians. I had my playlist going, a mix of indie rock and hip-hop that kept me energized, and I was making good time. The traffic was light, mostly other truckers and a few cars with out-of-state plates, Probably people heading to visit family or starting road trips. As I crossed into Ohio, though, I started to feel the fatigue creeping in. It started subtly, just a slight heaviness in my eyelids, a need to blink a bit more often than usual. I ignored it at first, figured I could power through. But by the time I reached the middle of Ohio, somewhere around Columbus, it was getting harder to ignore. My vision would blur slightly if I stared at the road for too long. My reactions felt sluggish. Most concerning, I caught myself nodding off twice, jerking awake with my heart pounding as I realized I'd lost a few seconds of consciousness. This was dangerous. I knew it was dangerous. But I was so close to my destination, relatively speaking, and the thought of pulling over and losing time was almost physically painful. I needed to complete this run. I needed to prove to myself and everyone else that I could handle this job, that I hadn't made a mistake by leaving school and becoming a trucker. I reached down to the center console, feeling around for one of the energy drinks I usually kept stocked there. My fingers found nothing but empty cup holders and some crumpled receipts. Shit. I'd forgotten to restock after my previous run. No Red Bull, no Monster, no 5-hour energy, nothing. I was running on fumes, literally and figuratively, with no chemical assistance available. Okay, I said out loud to myself, my voice sounding strange in the quiet of the cab. Okay, you need to stop. Find a gas station, get some caffeine, maybe stretch your legs. You can't keep going like this. It was the right decision, the smart decision, the only decision that made any sense. But even as I was saying it, I knew I wasn't going to do it. There was this stubborn part of me, this self-destructive streak that had been with me all my life, that refused to admit weakness or limitation. The same part that had pushed me to take 18 credit hours while working 2 part-time jobs in college. The same part that had kept me studying until 3 in the morning, even when my brain was fried and I couldn't retain any more information. That part of me was in control now, and it was saying, you can make it. Just push a little harder, just a little further. I should have listened to the rational voice. I should have pulled over, but I didn't. Instead, I started employing the usual tricks truckers use to stay awake. I rolled down the windows, letting the cool night air blast into the cab. I turned up the music, letting the bass thump through the speakers at a volume that was probably damaging my hearing. I started slapping myself lightly on the face, pinching my arms, anything to generate some stimulation and keep my nervous system engaged. It helped, but only temporarily. After a while, the cool air just felt normal. The music faded into background noise. The slapping and pinching lost their effectiveness. I was fighting a losing battle against my body's need for sleep, and deep down, I knew it. That's when I remembered the smelling salts. My Uncle Rick, who'd gotten me into this business in the first place, had given me a small bottle of them during my first week on the job. Emergency use only, he'd told me. If you're really in a bind and you need to stay awake for just a little bit longer. But don't make it a habit. That shit's not good for you if you use it too much. I'd kept the bottle in the glove compartment and had only used it once before, late one night when I'd been fighting to stay awake on a run through Wyoming. The effect had been immediate and intense, like getting punched in the face by pure consciousness. My eyes had watered, my nose had burned, and I'd been wide awake for the next hour at least. I reached over and popped open the glove compartment, fishing around until I found the small glass bottle. I unscrewed the cap and held it up to my nose, taking a big whiff of the ammonia-based crystals inside. The effect was instantaneous. My head snapped back, my eyes watered, and I felt like someone had just dumped a bucket of ice water over my head. My sinuses burned, my throat constricted, and for a few seconds I couldn't breathe properly. But then the sensation passed, and I was awake. Really, truly awake, more alert than I'd been in hours. "Okay," I said, screwing the cap back on and tossing the bottle back into the glove compartment. "Okay, that's better. That'll work." I kept driving, the miles ticking by on the odometer, the highway stretching out endlessly before me. The smelling salts had bought me some time, but I knew the effect wouldn't last forever. Maybe an hour, maybe less. I'd have to make a decision soon about whether to stop or keep pushing through. The highway was nearly empty at this point. It was past midnight, that dead zone between late night and early morning when most people are asleep and the world feels abandoned. I passed a few other trucks, their running lights visible in the distance, but otherwise I had the road to myself. It was peaceful in a way, but also unsettling. The isolation, the darkness, the sense that I was the only person awake in the entire state of Ohio. That's when I noticed the exit sign for a service area coming up in about 2 miles. Perfect timing. I could stop there, grab an energy drink from the vending machines, maybe use the restroom and be back on the road in 10 minutes. Quick and efficient, minimal time wasted. I put on my turn signal, even though there was nobody around to see it, and started to ease the truck toward the right lane. But as I got closer to the exit, something looked off. The lights that usually marked service areas weren't visible. In fact, I couldn't see any lights at all, just darkness beyond the exit ramp. I almost kept going, almost decided to skip this stop and wait for the next service area. But the need for caffeine and a bathroom break was becoming urgent, and I figured even if the place was closed, there might still be vending machines outside that worked. So I took the exit, following the ramp as it curved away from the highway and toward what should have been a rest stop. What I found instead was something different. The buildings were there. I could make them out in the darkness, but they were clearly abandoned. No lights, no cars in the parking lot, no signs of life whatsoever. The main building looked like it had once been a gas station and convenience store combo, but the pumps had been removed and the windows were dark. Next to it was a smaller building, maybe an old fast food place, also dark and abandoned. I should have turned around right then, should have gotten back on the highway and driven to the next exit. But I was here already, and surely there had to be something useful at this location. Maybe a working vending machine, or at least a place to park for a few minutes while I gathered myself. I pulled the truck into the empty parking lot and killed the engine. The sudden silence was almost deafening after hours of road noise and music. I sat there for a moment, looking at the abandoned buildings, trying to decide if this was a terrible idea or just a slightly bad one. 5 minutes, I told myself. Just check it out for 5 minutes, and if there's nothing here, you get back on the road. I grabbed my flashlight from the door pocket, tested it to make sure it worked, and climbed down from the cab. My legs were stiff from sitting for so long, and I had to hold on to the door for a moment while the blood flow returned to normal. The night air was cool but not cold, and there was a strange stillness to it, like the world was holding its breath. The parking lot was cracked and overgrown with weeds, and I could hear the crunch of gravel under my boots as I walked toward the main building. As I got closer, I could see that this place hadn't been abandoned recently. The windows were dusty and covered in grime. There were old leaves and trash piled up against the walls, and the paint on the doors was peeling and faded. This place had been closed for years, maybe decades. I tried the front door anyway, expecting it to be locked. To my surprise, it swung open with a long, drawn-out creak that made me flinch. I stood in the doorway, shining my flashlight into the darkness beyond, trying to see what was inside. The interior was gutted. Empty shelves lined the walls. There was a counter at the back that might have once held a register, and the floor was covered in dust and debris. No vending machines, no working lights, nothing useful at all. Just an empty shell of a building that had once served travelers, but now served no purpose except to decay slowly into the earth. I was about to turn around and head back to my truck when I noticed a faint glow coming from somewhere deeper in the building. I paused, squinting into the darkness, trying to locate the source. It seemed to be coming from a back room, maybe an office or storage area. Just a faint greenish light that barely penetrated the darkness. Curiosity got the better of me. I know, classic horror movie mistake. But I was tired and not thinking clearly, and some part of me was hoping that the glow meant there was still electricity running to the building, which might mean there was a working vending machine, or at least a bathroom with running water somewhere. I walked through the main room, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, dust motes dancing in the light. The floor creaked under my weight, and I could hear small sounds in the walls, probably mice or rats that had made this abandoned building their home. The glow got brighter as I approached the back room, and I could see now that it was coming from under a closed door. I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling slightly even though I wasn't sure why. Some animal instinct was telling me to turn around, to get out of this place, but I ignored it. I turned the knob and pushed the door open slowly. The back room was small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, and it contained exactly one thing, a refrigerator. An old, battered refrigerator that was somehow still running, its interior light creating that greenish glow I'd seen. It was plugged into a wall outlet, and I could hear the low hum of its compressor. "What the hell?" I muttered, walking over to the fridge. Why was there a working refrigerator in an abandoned building? Who was paying the electric bill? What was it doing here? I opened the door wider, half expecting to find it stocked with drinks or food that I could purchase or borrow. But the interior was completely empty. Not just empty of food, but empty of everything. The shelves had been removed, the drawers had been taken out, it was just a hollow box with a light in it. Someone had gutted this refrigerator just like they'd gutted the rest of the building. I stood there staring at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Who removes the shelves from a refrigerator? Why would you leave it running if you weren't storing anything in it? None of it made any logical sense. Behind me, somewhere in the main room, I heard a sound, a clatter like something had been knocked over or dropped. I spun around, my heart suddenly pounding, my flashlight beam sweeping across the empty doorway. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and uncertain. "Is someone there?" No response. Just silence, and that low hum from the refrigerator behind me. I stood there frozen, listening intently, trying to hear any other sounds. Had I imagined it? Had it been an animal? Or was there someone else in this building with me? After about 30 seconds of silence, I decided I'd had enough. This place was creeping me out, and whatever curiosity had driven me to explore was now completely overwhelmed by a desire to get the hell out. I closed the refrigerator door, turned around, and walked quickly back through the main room toward the exit. I was maybe halfway to the door when I heard the sound again, louder this time. Definitely not my imagination. Definitely not an animal. It sounded like something heavy being dragged across the floor, or maybe furniture being moved, and it was coming from somewhere near the entrance. I stopped walking and raised my flashlight, trying to see what was making the noise. The beam illuminated the empty room, the counter, the shelves, the door. Everything looked the same as it had when I came in, but something felt different. The air felt different, like the atmosphere in the room had changed somehow. "Look, if someone's here, you need to say something," I called out, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "I'm not trying to cause any trouble. I'm just a trucker who needed to take a break." Still no response. But I was certain now that I wasn't alone in this building. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, to get out now, to not wait around to find out who or what was sharing this space with me. I started walking toward the door again. Faster now, not quite running, but close to it. My boots thudded against the floor, and I could hear my own breathing, harsh and rapid. The door was maybe 20 feet away, 15 feet, 10 feet. I reached for the handle, grabbed it, pulled it open. The cool night air rushed in, and I practically fell through the doorway in my haste to get outside. I didn't look back, didn't pause to investigate the sounds I'd heard, just started half running, half jogging back toward my truck. Behind me, I heard the door to the building swing open again. I did look back then, couldn't help myself, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The door was standing wide open, but I couldn't see anyone in the doorway. No person, no animal, nothing. Just darkness and that open door, swinging slightly in the still night air. But I absolutely knew that I hadn't left that door open. I'd closed it behind me, or at least I thought I had. I didn't wait around to figure it out. I ran the rest of the way to my truck, yanked open the driver's side door, and hauled myself up into the cab. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. But finally, I managed it, and the engine roared to life. I threw the truck into gear and peeled out of that parking lot like the devil himself was chasing me, not caring that I was probably damaging the transmission with my rough handling. The abandoned buildings receded in my rearview mirror, and within minutes I was back on the highway, surrounded by the familiar lights and sounds of the interstate. My heart was still pounding, and I could feel adrenaline coursing through my system, making my hands shake and my breathing rapid. What the hell had just happened back there? Had there really been someone in that building with me, or had my exhausted brain been playing tricks on me? The logical part of my mind said it was probably just an animal, or the building settling, or any number of mundane explanations. But the primitive part of my brain, the part that had kept our ancestors alive on the African savanna, was convinced that I'd just narrowly escaped something dangerous. I drove for another 10 minutes, putting as much distance as possible between myself and that abandoned rest stop, before I finally allowed myself to slow down to a normal speed. My breathing was starting to return to normal, and the adrenaline was beginning to wear off, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion that was even worse than before. I needed to stop, really stop this time, at a well-lit, definitely not abandoned truck stop with other people around. I pulled out my phone and checked the GPS for the nearest option. There was a major truck stop about 15 miles ahead, one of the big national chains that stayed open 24 hours. Perfect. 15 minutes later, I pulled into the parking lot, found a spot between two other semis, and killed the engine. I sat there for a moment, just breathing, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Then I grabbed my wallet and climbed down from the cab, determined to get the biggest, most caffeinated beverage they had, and maybe something to eat. Real food from a real store, surrounded by real people. The store was brightly lit and blessedly normal, with rows of snacks and drinks and hot food under heat lamps. There were a few other people inside, mostly truckers like me, looking tired but not terrified. I grabbed 2 energy drinks, a large coffee, and a sandwich, paid the clerk, and headed back out to my truck. I felt better with food and caffeine in my system, more grounded, more rational. The incident at the abandoned rest stop was starting to feel less like a horror movie and more like an unfortunate result of driving while exhausted. I'd let my imagination run wild, that's all. Nothing had actually happened. I was fine. I climbed back into the truck, settled into the driver's seat, and took a long drink of coffee. The caffeine hit my system almost immediately, and I could feel myself becoming more alert. This was what I'd needed all along, not smelling salts or willpower, just a proper break and some chemical assistance. I started the engine and was about to pull out of the parking lot when something caught my eye in the rearview mirror. The curtain that separated the cab from the sleeper berth, the one I always kept closed to block out light and maintain some privacy, was moving. Not just fluttering from air conditioning, but moving deliberately, like someone was touching it from the other side. I froze, my hand still on the gear shift, my eyes locked on the mirror. The curtain moved again, definitely being pushed aside by something. I watched in growing horror as it slowly parted, revealing the dark space of the sleeper berth behind it. My first thought was that I was hallucinating, that the exhaustion and stress had finally pushed me over the edge, and I was seeing things that weren't there. But the curtain kept moving, kept parting, and then I saw it. A hand, a human hand, dirty and pale, reaching through the gap in the curtain. I didn't think, didn't plan, didn't try to figure out what was happening or how someone could be in my sleeper. I just reacted on pure instinct. I threw open the driver's side door and practically fell out of the cab, stumbling on the pavement but staying upright. I ran toward the store, not looking back, my legs pumping and my lungs burning. I burst through the doors of the truck stop, startling the clerk and the few customers inside. "Call the police!" I shouted, my voice coming out higher and more panicked than I'd intended. "There's someone in my truck! Someone broke into my truck!" The clerk, a middle-aged woman with gray hair and a name tag that said Denise, picked up the phone immediately. "Okay, honey, okay, just calm down. I'm calling them right now. Which truck is yours?" I told her, pointing vaguely in the direction of the parking lot even though she couldn't see it from where she was standing. Another trucker, a big guy with a beard and a John Deere cap, stood up from where he'd been sitting at a table. "You want me to go check it out?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. "No," I said, probably too loudly. "No, don't go near it. Whoever's in there, they might be dangerous. Just wait for the cops." The police arrived maybe 10 minutes later, though it felt like an eternity. 2 officers in a county sheriff's cruiser, both of them looking simultaneously alert and annoyed at being called out to a truck stop in the middle of the night. I explained the situation to them as coherently as I could, told them about seeing the hand reach through the curtain, about the strange experience at the abandoned rest stop earlier. One of the officers, a younger guy with short brown hair, looked skeptical. "Sir, have you been drinking tonight? Or using any substances?" "What? No. I'm a professional driver. I don't drink on the job. I'm telling you, there's someone in my truck." The officers exchanged a look, and then the older one, a woman with gray streaks in her dark hair, nodded toward the parking lot. "All right, let's go check it out." "You stay here, sir. We'll handle this." I watched through the windows as they approached my truck, their hands resting on their service weapons, moving carefully and professionally. The younger officer went to the driver's side while the older one positioned herself on the passenger side. They shouted something I couldn't hear, probably announcing themselves as police and demanding that anyone inside come out. Nothing happened for about 30 seconds. Then the older officer moved to the back of the truck and opened the door to the sleeper berth. Both officers had their weapons drawn now, pointing into the interior. I held my breath, watching, waiting. And then I saw them, 3 people climbing out of the back of my truck. 2 men and 1 woman, all of them looking disheveled and dirty, all of them holding their hands up in surrender. The officers moved in quickly, handcuffing all 3 of them and searching them for weapons. My legs nearly gave out when I saw them. I hadn't been hallucinating. I hadn't been imagining things. There had actually been people in my truck, hiding in the sleeper berth, riding along with me for God knows how long. The thought made my skin crawl. The older officer came back into the store a few minutes later and approached me. "Sir, we've detained 3 individuals who were found in your vehicle. Do you know any of them? Did you give them permission to be in your truck?" "No, I've never seen them before in my life. How did they even get in there? We're still figuring that out. We'll need you to come down to the station and file a full report. And we'll need to search your vehicle to make sure there's no contraband or evidence of other crimes." "Other crimes? What are you talking about?" The officer hesitated, then said, "One of the individuals was armed with 2 switchblades. We're taking this very seriously." The next few hours were a blur of police stations, interviews, and paperwork. I sat in a small room with fluorescent lights that hummed and flickered, drinking terrible coffee from a styrofoam cup and answering the same questions over and over again. No, I didn't know the individuals who'd been found in my truck. No, I hadn't given anyone permission to be there. No, I hadn't noticed anything unusual until I saw the curtain moving. Well, except for the abandoned rest stop. But surely that wasn't related, was it? The detective handling my case was a man in his 50s named Rawlings, with tired eyes and the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd seen too much human ugliness over the years. He sat across from me at a metal table, a notepad in front of him, and listened to my story with an expression that gave nothing away. "Walk me through your road again," he said, clicking his pen. "From the beginning. When did you first notice something was off?" I went through it all again. The drive from Connecticut to New Jersey, then the second leg from New Jersey toward Indiana. The exhaustion, the stop at the abandoned rest stop, the strange refrigerator, the sounds in the building. Detective Rawlings' expression changed slightly when I mentioned the abandoned rest stop. "This place," he said, "can you describe exactly where it was?" "Somewhere in Ohio, off I-78. I don't remember the exact exit number. It was after Columbus, but before the Indiana border." Rawlings wrote something down, then looked at me again. "And you went inside the building?" "Yeah. I was looking for a vending machine or something. I needed caffeine. Did you see anyone inside?" "No, but I heard something. Noises. Like someone moving around. That's why I left so quickly." Rawlings nodded slowly, still writing. "Mr. Morrison, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Is there any possibility, any at all, that these individuals entered your vehicle while you were at that rest stop?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so focused on the immediate shock of finding people in my truck that I hadn't really thought about when or how they'd gotten in there. But now that Rawlings mentioned it, the timing made horrible sense. "I didn't lock the truck," I said quietly. "When I got out to check the rest stop, I didn't lock the doors. I was only planning to be gone for a few minutes, and I didn't think... the place was abandoned. I didn't think anyone would be there. But clearly someone was," Rawlings said. "Multiple someones, in fact. And while you were inside exploring that building, they saw an opportunity." I felt sick. While I'd been poking around in that abandoned building, getting spooked by noises and empty refrigerators, 3 people had climbed into the back of my truck and hidden themselves in the sleeper berth. They'd been there the whole time I drove away, the whole time I stopped at the truck stop, the whole time I sat in the cab drinking coffee and congratulating myself on having gotten caffeine. They'd been right behind me, separated by just a thin curtain, close enough to touch me if they'd wanted to. What were they planning to do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Were they going to rob me? Kill me? Rawlings's expression softened slightly. "We're still interviewing them, trying to piece together their intentions. But based on preliminary questioning, it appears they were homeless individuals looking for a ride to a warmer climate. They've been squatting at that abandoned rest stop for several weeks, apparently. When they saw your truck pull up, they saw it as an opportunity for free transportation. But one of them had knives, 2 switchblades. Yes, that's the concerning part. We're running their information through our databases now, checking for outstanding warrants or prior criminal history. It's possible the weapons were just for self-defense, or it's possible they had more sinister intentions. We won't know until we know more about who these people are." I sat there processing this information, trying to wrap my mind around how close I'd come to what exactly. Best case scenario, I'd have been robbed and maybe beaten up. Worst case scenario, I'd have ended up as another statistic, another trucker who disappeared on a lonely highway and was never seen again. The thought made my hands shake, and I had to set down my coffee cup before I spilled it. "Can I see them?" I asked suddenly. "The people who were in my truck, can I see what they look like?" Rawlings considered this for a moment, then nodded. "I suppose that would be all right. You might be able to provide information that helps us identify them if they're not being cooperative. Come with me." He led me down a hallway to a room with a one-way mirror. On the other side of the glass, I could see the 3 individuals who'd been pulled from my truck. They were sitting at a table, still handcuffed, looking tired and defeated. The first was a man in his 30s or maybe 40s. It was hard to tell. He had long, greasy hair that hung in his face and a patchy beard that suggested malnutrition or poor health. His clothes were layers of different garments, all of them dirty and worn. He was staring at the table, not speaking, his shoulders hunched. The second man was younger, maybe mid-20s, with a shaved head and neck tattoos that I couldn't make out clearly from this distance. He was more animated than the first man, talking to someone I couldn't see, his hands moving despite the handcuffs. The woman was harder to look at somehow. She was probably in her late 30s with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and a face that might have been pretty once but was now gaunt and hollow-eyed. She was wrapped in a dirty blanket and she was staring at nothing, her expression completely blank. "Do you recognize any of them?" Rawlings asked. I shook my head. "No, I've never seen any of them before." The older man, the one with the long hair, that's the one who had the knives. Won't tell us his name, won't tell us where he's from, won't tell us anything. The younger man says his name is Kyle and claims they were just trying to get to Florida, where they have family. The woman hasn't spoken a single word since we brought her in. I stared at them through the glass, these 3 strangers who'd invaded my truck and my life, and I tried to feel anger or hatred or something, but mostly what I felt was a weird combination of fear and pity. They looked like people who'd been beaten down by life, who'd made bad decision after bad decision until they ended up squatting in abandoned buildings and sneaking into trucks. That didn't excuse what they'd done, didn't make it okay that they'd put me in danger, but it made them seem less like monsters and more like desperate, broken people. "What happens to them now?" I asked. "They'll be charged with trespassing, possible vehicle tampering and weapons violations for the knives. Depending on what we find in their background checks, there might be additional charges. Best case for them, they spend a few months in county jail. Worst case, if any of them have outstanding warrants or if we can prove intent to harm, they could be looking at serious prison time." "And what about me? Can I go?" Rawlings nodded. "Yeah, you're free to go. We've got your statement, we've got your contact information. If we need anything else, we'll give you a call. Your truck has been searched and cleared, and we've taken photos of everything for evidence. It's all yours." I thanked him, though I wasn't sure what I was thanking him for exactly. For catching the people in my truck? For not arresting me for being stupid enough to leave my doors unlocked? For treating me like a victim instead of an idiot? I walked back out to the parking lot where my truck was waiting, its familiar shape silhouetted against the early morning sky. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the horizon in shades of orange and pink. I'd been up for more than 24 hours straight, and I felt every minute of it in my bones. Before I climbed back into the cab, I walked around the entire truck, checking every door, every compartment, every possible entry point. Then I climbed up into the driver's seat and locked all the doors from the inside. Only then did I feel safe enough to breathe normally. I called my dispatcher and explained what had happened, leaving out some of the more embarrassing details about the abandoned rest stop. He was surprisingly understanding, told me to find a motel and get some real sleep, and that we'd figure out the delivery schedule later. I thanked him and ended the call, then just sat there for a while, trying to decide what to do next. The smart thing would be to follow his advice, find a motel, and crash for 10 or 12 hours. But the thought of sleeping, of letting my guard down and being unconscious and vulnerable, was terrifying. What if there were more people hiding somewhere in the truck? What if I'd missed something in my inspection? What if I closed my eyes and woke up to find myself in danger again? I compromised by driving to the nearest major truck stop, the kind with 24-hour security and cameras everywhere, and parking in the most visible spot I could find. Then I reclined the driver's seat as far as it would go and tried to get some rest. It wasn't real sleep, more like a series of fitful naps, punctuated by jolts of panic where I'd snap awake and look around to make sure I was still alone. But it was better than nothing. Around noon, I finally gave up on sleeping and decided to complete my delivery. I'd come this far, and despite everything that had happened, the load still needed to get to Lafayette. So I started the truck, pulled back onto the highway, and drove the remaining distance to my destination. The delivery went smoothly, thankfully. The warehouse workers unloaded my trailer efficiently, I signed the paperwork, and within an hour I was back on the road. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. The cab of my truck, which had always felt like a safe space, like my own private sanctuary on wheels, now felt contaminated somehow. Every shadow looked suspicious, every noise made me jump. I kept glancing back at the curtain separating the cab from the sleeper berth, half expecting to see it move again. The days following the incident were some of the hardest of my life. I tried to go back to work, tried to maintain my normal schedule and routine, but nothing felt normal anymore. Every time I climbed into my truck, I'd spend 10 or 15 minutes searching every inch of the interior, checking the sleeper berth, the storage compartments, even looking under the truck and in the wheel wells. I knew I was being paranoid, knew that the chances of something like that happening again were astronomically low, but I couldn't stop myself. I started carrying a baseball bat in the cab with me, propped up against the passenger seat where I could grab it quickly if needed. I also bought a heavy-duty lock for the sleeper berth door, so that even if I was sleeping in the front, nobody could access the back without me knowing. These precautions made me feel slightly better, slightly more in control, but they didn't address the root problem. I was scared. The fear manifested in different ways. I stopped taking loads that required overnight drives. I stopped at well-lit, populated truck stops only, never pulling over on the side of the road or at rest areas unless absolutely necessary. I kept my phone charged at all times and made sure I always had a signal. I told friends and family my route before every trip and checked in with them at regular intervals. My dispatcher noticed the change in my behavior. "You doing okay?" he asked during a phone call to discuss my next load. "You've been turning down a lot of runs lately, the overnight ones especially." "Yeah, I'm fine," I lied. "Just trying to maintain a better work-life balance, you know?" "Uh-huh. Look, I get that what happened was scary, but you can't let it control your life. This is a safe job, statistically speaking. You're more likely to get in a car accident than to have someone break into your truck." 3 people hid in my truck and rode with me for miles while I had no idea they were there, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. One of them had knives, so forgive me if I'm not ready to just pretend everything is normal. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Fair enough," he said finally. "Take whatever time you need, but eventually, you're going to have to decide if you can keep doing this job or if you need to find something else." That conversation stuck with me. Was I going to let this incident end my trucking career? Was I going to let fear dictate my choices and limit my options? I'd already dropped out of college because of anxiety and pressure. Was I going to drop out of this career too? I talked to my Uncle Rick about it a few weeks after the incident. We met for dinner at a restaurant halfway between his route and mine, and I laid out everything that had happened, everything I'd been feeling. "You think I'm being ridiculous," I said after I'd finished my story. "You think I'm overreacting." Rick shook his head. "No, I don't think that at all. What happened to you was legitimately traumatic. You had people invade your space, your home essentially, and they had weapons. That's not something you just brush off." "But I can't keep living like this. I can't keep being afraid of my own truck." "No, you can't," Rick agreed. "So here's what I think you should do. First, you need to talk to someone, a therapist, a counselor, someone who specializes in trauma. What you're experiencing is probably PTSD, and that's not something you can just will yourself out of. You need professional help." I started to protest, started to say that I didn't need therapy, that I could handle this on my own. But Rick held up his hand. "Let me finish. Second, you need to make some practical changes to increase your sense of safety. Better locks, maybe some kind of alarm system for the truck. There are companies that make motion sensors for vehicles, things that will alert you if someone's trying to break in. Look into that." "I've already got a lock for the sleeper berth," I said. "Good, that's a start. And third, you need to ease back into the job gradually. Don't try to go back to your old schedule right away. Start with short daytime runs, trips where you're never more than an hour from civilization. Build your confidence back up slowly." It was good advice, practical and compassionate, and I took it to heart. I found a therapist who specialized in trauma and started weekly sessions. It was awkward at first, talking to a stranger about my fears and anxieties, but it helped. She taught me breathing exercises for when I felt panic rising, gave me strategies for managing intrusive thoughts, and helped me understand that what I was experiencing was a normal response to an abnormal situation. I also upgraded my truck's security. I installed motion sensors on all the doors, bought better locks, and even set up a small camera in the sleeper berth that I could monitor from my phone. Were these measures extreme? Probably, but they made me feel safer, and that was what mattered. Slowly, very slowly, I started taking longer runs again. First, just 3 or 4 hours, then 6, then 8. I worked my way back up to overnight drives, though I was much more careful about where I stopped and how I secured my truck. The paranoia didn't go away completely, but it became manageable. I learned to distinguish between reasonable caution and irrational fear. About 6 months after the incident, Detective Rawlings called me with an update. The 3 individuals who'd been found in my truck had all been identified and charged. The older man with the knives turned out to have an outstanding warrant for assault in Michigan, and he was facing serious prison time. The younger man, Kyle, had pleaded guilty to trespassing and got probation plus time served. The woman, who they'd eventually identified as a missing person from Iowa, was being transferred to a psychiatric facility for evaluation. "I thought you'd want to know how it all turned out," Rawlings said. "And I wanted to tell you that your testimony was helpful in securing the convictions. You did good, Mr. Morrison." "Thanks," I said, though I wasn't sure how to feel about it. Relief, maybe, that they'd been caught and punished. Sadness that their lives had gone so wrong that they'd ended up in that situation. A mixture of both? "One more thing," Rawlings added. "We investigated that abandoned rest stop you mentioned, the one where you think they got into your truck. Turns out it's been a known squatter location for years. We cleared it out after your incident, arrested a few people who were living there, and the county has since fenced it off and installed no trespassing signs. So at least some good came out of this. After we hung up, I sat in my truck for a while, processing this information. The abandoned rest stop had been shut down. The people who'd invaded my truck had been caught and charged. The case was closed. I should have felt closure, should have felt like this chapter of my life was finished and I could move on. But I didn't feel closure. I felt tired. Tired of being afraid. Tired of second-guessing every decision. Tired of the constant vigilance that had become my default state. I wanted to go back to the way things were before, when trucking had felt like freedom instead of a series of potential dangers to be navigated. It's been a year and a half since 3 strangers climbed into the back of my truck while I was exploring an abandoned rest stop in Ohio. A year and a half since I discovered them hiding behind the curtain, armed with knives and wrapped in dirty blankets. A year and a half since I learned that the world is more dangerous than I'd wanted to believe, and that sometimes the threats don't announce themselves with obvious warning signs. I'm still driving trucks, still hauling freight across the country, still spending more nights on the road than in my apartment. But I'm different now, changed in ways both obvious and subtle. I'm more cautious, more prepared, more aware of my surroundings. I'm also, I'd like to think, more compassionate toward the people I see on the margins of society, the ones living in cars or under bridges or in abandoned buildings. Not enough to let them into my truck, mind you, but enough to understand that desperation can drive people to do things they might not otherwise do. The therapy helped. I still see my counselor once a month just to check in and make sure I'm staying on track mentally. She's taught me a lot about trauma and resilience, about the difference between being careful and being paralyzed by fear. I've learned that what happened to me was scary, yes, but it doesn't have to define the rest of my life. I can acknowledge the danger while still moving forward. I've also become something of an advocate for truck security among my fellow drivers. I tell my story at truck stops and rest areas, warning other drivers about the risks of leaving their vehicles unlocked, even for just a few minutes. Some of them think I'm being paranoid, that I'm letting one bad experience turn me into a fearmonger. But others thank me, tell me they've started being more careful because of what I've shared. If even one driver avoids what happened to me because I spoke up, then it's worth it. My relationship with my truck has evolved too. It's no longer just a vehicle or a tool for making money. It's my workspace, my sanctuary, my home away from home. I've made it as comfortable and secure as possible, installing not just security equipment, but also little touches that make it feel more personal. Photos of my family on the dashboard, a good sound system for music, comfortable bedding in the sleeper berth. If I'm going to spend this much time in here, I want it to feel like it's truly mine. I think a lot about those 3 people sometimes. The older man who wouldn't give his name, now serving time in a Michigan prison for the assault charge. Kyle, the younger man with the neck tattoos, who's hopefully gotten his life together and is staying out of trouble. And the woman, the one who never spoke, who turned out to be a missing person with mental health issues that went untreated for too long. I wonder where they are now, whether they think about that night as often as I do, whether they have any regrets about the choices that led them to hide in the back of a stranger's truck. I don't hate them. That might sound strange, but it's true. I was angry at first, furious that they'd invaded my space and put me in danger, but that anger has faded, replaced by a more complex understanding of how people end up in desperate situations. They were homeless, probably hungry, definitely struggling with issues I can't fully comprehend. That doesn't excuse what they did, but it contextualizes it, makes it slightly more understandable. What I do hate is the system that allowed them to fall through the cracks in the first place. The lack of mental health services, the inadequate support for people experiencing homelessness, the cycle of poverty and desperation that makes people feel like they have no options except to hide in trucks or squat in abandoned buildings. If there had been better resources available, maybe they wouldn't have been in that situation. Maybe I wouldn't have been either. I've thought about going back to school sometimes, finishing the degree I started before everything fell apart. Maybe studying social work or psychology, using what I've learned from my own experiences to help others. But trucking has gotten into my blood in a way I didn't expect. There's something meditative about the long drives, something peaceful about the rhythm of the road. It's given me time to think, time to process, time to figure out who I am and who I want to be. I'm still young, relatively speaking, only in my mid-20s, with my whole life ahead of me. This career doesn't have to be forever. But for now, it's what I need. It pays my bills, gives me space to heal, and allows me the independence I crave. And with the security measures I've put in place, with the lessons I've learned, I feel as safe as anyone can feel in this job. The abandoned rest stop where it all happened has been demolished, according to a news article I found online. The county decided it was too much of a liability, too much of a magnet for crime and squatters, so they tore down the buildings and filled in the area. Part of me is glad it's gone, glad that other drivers won't stumble into the same situation I did. But another part of me feels sad about it, like a chapter of my life has been literally erased from the landscape. I drive past that exit sometimes, when my routes take me through that part of Ohio. The ramp is still there, but it's been blocked off, with concrete barriers preventing anyone from leaving the highway. There's nothing to see, just an empty stretch of land where buildings used to stand. But I always slow down when I pass it, always take a moment to remember what happened there, to acknowledge how close I came to something much worse than what actually occurred. My friends and family know the story now, the whole story. I didn't tell them at first, didn't want to worry them or make them think I couldn't handle my job. But eventually, I realized that keeping it secret was just another form of fear, another way of letting the incident control me. So I told them, and they were supportive and understanding, even if some of them tried to convince me to find a different career. "You could do anything," my mother said when I told her. "You're smart, you're capable, you don't have to put yourself in danger like this." But I tried to explain to her that every job has risks. Every career has moments of danger or uncertainty. The difference is that now I know what some of those risks look like, and I can prepare for them. That makes me better at my job, not worse. I still have bad days. Days when the paranoia creeps back in, when I check the sleeper berth 5 times before I feel comfortable starting the truck. Days when I see someone walking along the highway and my first thought is that they're going to try to break into my truck. Days when I wonder if I should have just stayed in school, pushed through my anxiety, and gotten that degree like everyone expected me to. But I also have good days. Days when I watch the sunrise over the mountains and feel grateful to have a front row seat to such beauty. Days when I help another driver with a mechanical problem or share information about a good road. Days when I make my delivery on time, do my job well, and feel a sense of pride in my work. The incident taught me a lot about fear, about vulnerability, about the unpredictability of life. But it also taught me about resilience, about the human capacity to adapt and overcome. I'm not the same person I was before that night in Ohio. I'm more cautious, yes, but also more confident. More aware of danger, but also more appreciative of safety and normalcy. I lock my truck every time I leave it now, even if I'm just running into a gas station for 2 minutes. I check the back before I start driving, every single time. I trust my instincts when something feels off. These habits have become second nature. Automatic behaviors that require no conscious thought. And I talk about what happened, not to dwell on it or seek sympathy, but to educate others to prevent similar incidents, to contribute to a culture of safety in the trucking industry. Some drivers have thanked me for speaking up, have told me they've changed their own habits because of my story. That feels good. Feels like something positive came from something negative. I don't know if I'll be a trucker forever. Maybe I'll go back to school eventually, pursue a different career, settle down somewhere and stop living on the road. But for now, this is where I need to be. This job, this lifestyle, this constant movement from one place to another, it suits me. It gives me what I need. The highway stretches out before me, just like it does every day, familiar and unchanging. Somewhere behind me is the past, the mistakes I've made, the fears I've faced, the moments that have shaped who I am. Somewhere ahead of me is the future, uncertain and full of possibility. But right now, in this moment, I'm exactly where I need to be. Behind the wheel, moving forward, living my life despite the scars it's left on me. The truck's security system beeps softly. All systems normal, all doors secure. The sun is setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I've got a full tank of diesel, a thermos of coffee, and a clear route to my destination. In the rearview mirror, I can see the empty sleeper berth, the curtain pulled back so I can see that I'm alone. Just me and the road, the way it should be. I turn up the music, settle into my seat, and keep driving. There's a delivery to make, miles to cover, a job to do. And I'm going to do it well, because that's what I've chosen. This life, this career, this particular path through the world. It's not always easy, and it's certainly not always safe, but it's mine. The incident is part of my story now, but it's not the whole story. It's one chapter in a book that's still being written, one experience among many that will shape who I become. I survived it, learned from it, and moved forward. That's all anyone can do, really. Take what life throws at you, process it as best you can, and keep going. The highway rolls on beneath my wheels, carrying me toward whatever comes next. I'm ready for it, whatever it is. The stowaways taught me that much at least. You can't always control what happens to you, but you can control how you respond. You can let fear paralyze you, or you can acknowledge it and move forward anyway. I choose to move forward. Always forward. 1 mile at a time. One delivery at a time, one day at a time. The road is long, and there's a lot of it left to travel, but I've got a good truck, good training, and good instincts. That's enough. That has to be enough. And so far, it has been. My name is Kevin, and I've been hauling freight across this great country of ours for the better part of 15 years. 15 years of truck stops and loading docks, of highways that all start to look the same after a while, of sunrises viewed through a dirty windshield and coffee that tastes like it was brewed in a boot. It's not a glamorous life, not by any stretch of the imagination, but it's honest work and it pays the bills. More importantly, it's what I know. It's what I'm good at. When you've been doing this job as long as I have, you develop certain habits, certain routines that keep you sane and keep you safe. You learn which truck stops have the cleanest showers and which ones to avoid. You learn how to read the weather, how to spot black ice before you're sliding across it, how to tell when your rig is developing a problem before it becomes a breakdown. You learn the rhythms of the road, the ebb and flow of traffic, the best times to drive and the best times to rest. But the most important thing you learn, the thing that separates the veterans from the rookies, is how to manage your time and your energy. This job will grind you down if you let it. The irregular hours, the long stretches away from home, the constant pressure to deliver on time, it all adds up. You have to know your limits, have to understand when to push yourself and when to back off. That's the theory, anyway. In practice, I've never been very good at following that advice. I'm what you might call a workaholic, always have been. My ex-wife used to say I was married to the job first and her second, and she wasn't entirely wrong. I'd take any load, any time, no matter how tight the schedule or how tired I was. I prided myself on my work ethic, on being the guy who always delivered, who never complained, who could be counted on no matter what. That attitude served me well for a long time. I built a reputation as a reliable driver, someone who got the job done. The dispatchers knew they could call me at any hour of the day or night, and I'd say yes. The pay was good, the work was steady, and I convinced myself that the sacrifices were worth it. Never mind that my marriage fell apart. Never mind that I barely saw my kids as they were growing up. Never mind that I was running myself into the ground. I was providing for my family, wasn't I? I was doing what needed to be done. This particular incident happened about 4 years ago, back in the spring of 2019. I was working for a warehouse operation based out of Fargo, North Dakota, running loads all across the upper Midwest and into Montana. North Dakota is about as flat as a state can get, which makes for easy driving but also makes for monotonous scenery. After a while, all those endless wheat fields and empty horizons start to blur together, and you have to work to stay engaged with what you're doing. It was a Tuesday morning in early May, the kind of spring day where winter hasn't quite loosened its grip yet and the air still has that crisp, cold edge to it. I'd finished a delivery in Fargo the night before and was scheduled to pick up a new load first thing in the morning. The warehouse manager, a guy named Pete, who I'd known for years, had a rush job for me. Computer equipment and electronics headed for a distribution center in Billings, Montana. High-value cargo, time-sensitive delivery, premium pay. I need it there by 7 tomorrow morning, Pete told me as we stood in his office, going over the paperwork. I know that's a tight window, but the client is willing to pay double the usual rate if we can make it happen. I did the math in my head. Fargo to Billings was roughly 700 miles, give or take. Under normal circumstances, with proper rest stops and meal breaks, it would be about a 12-hour drive. But if I pushed it, if I drove straight through with minimal stops, I could do it in under 11 hours. Factor in loading time and a small buffer for unexpected delays, and I'd need to be on the road by 7 or 8 in the evening to make the morning deadline. That means driving all night, I said, more to myself than to Pete. I know it's not ideal, Pete said, but like I said, the money's good, and you're the only driver I trust to make this happen. If you don't think you can do it, I understand. I can try to negotiate a later delivery time. The rational part of my brain was telling me to negotiate that later delivery time. I'd already worked a full day, and I'd been driving for most of the previous week without a real break. I was tired, operating on 4 hours of sleep and too much coffee. Taking on an overnight run in that condition was asking for trouble. But the stubborn, prideful part of my brain, the part that had been steering my decisions for most of my career, wouldn't let me back down. I was Kevin, the guy who always delivered, who never said no, who could handle anything the job threw at him. Plus, double the usual rate was too good to pass up. That money could go toward the college fund I was building for my youngest daughter, or toward the debt I was still paying down from the divorce. I can do it, I said, and Pete's face broke into a relieved smile. I knew I could count on you. Load's ready to go whenever you are. Just need your signature here and here. I signed the papers, went through the usual pre-trip inspection of my rig, and by 7:30 that evening, I was pulling out of the warehouse lot with a trailer full of expensive electronics and a long night of driving ahead of me. The sun was just starting to set, painting the western sky in shades of orange and red that would have been beautiful if I'd had the time or energy to appreciate them. The first couple of hours went smoothly. I took I-94 west out of Fargo, merging into the light evening traffic. There weren't many other vehicles on the road, just a few cars and the occasional truck. The radio was playing classic rock, stations fading in and out as I moved across the landscape. I had a thermos of coffee, a bag of beef jerky, and a sense of determination that I was going to make this delivery on time no matter what. As I crossed into Montana, the landscape started to change. The flat farmland of North Dakota gave way to the rolling hills and eventually the mountains of Montana. The road started to wind and climb, requiring more attention and engagement than the straight, flat highways I'd been driving. This was good in a way because it kept me alert and focused, but it was also more tiring, requiring constant adjustments to speed and gear. By the time I reached Miles City, it was after 10 o'clock and I was starting to feel the first real waves of exhaustion. Not just tiredness, but that deep, bone-deep fatigue that comes from pushing your body past its natural limits. My eyes felt gritty and heavy. My neck was stiff from hours of sitting in the same position, and I could feel a headache building behind my temples. I should have stopped in Miles City. There were truck stops there, places where I could have pulled over for a few hours of rest. But I was making good time, better than I'd anticipated, and I didn't want to lose momentum. If I kept going, if I pushed through the tiredness, I'd reach Billings with time to spare. I could rest after the delivery, I told myself. Just a few more hours. I pulled into a gas station to refuel and use the bathroom. While the diesel was pumping, I went inside and bought 2 more energy drinks and a large coffee. The clerk, a young kid who couldn't have been more than 20, gave me a concerned look. "You driving all night?" he asked. "That's the plan. Be careful out there. Roads get pretty empty after midnight. Not much between here and Billings except a whole lot of nothing." I thanked him for the advice and headed back to my truck. I downed one of the energy drinks before I even left the parking lot, feeling the caffeine and sugar hit my system like a small jolt of electricity. It helped, temporarily at least. I felt more alert, more focused. I could do this. The highway between Miles City and Billings is a lonely stretch of road, especially at night. It cuts through a landscape that's somewhere between high plains and mountains, with forests on either side, and the occasional small town or ranch breaking up the emptiness. During the day, it's scenic in a stark, austere way. At night, it's just dark. The kind of darkness that swallows up your headlights and presses in from all sides. I kept the radio on, switching between stations as they faded out, trying to maintain some connection to the outside world. But eventually, even that became too much effort, and I turned it off. The silence was absolute except for the rumble of the engine and the whisper of tires on asphalt. It was just me and the road and the darkness. That's when the real struggle began. The caffeine from the energy drink was starting to wear off, and the exhaustion was coming back stronger than before. My eyelids felt like they had weights attached to them. My vision would blur if I stared at the road for too long. Most concerning, I started to experience what I'd later learn were microsleeps, brief episodes of unconsciousness lasting just a few seconds, where my brain would simply shut down despite my best efforts to stay awake. The first time it happened, I jerked awake to find my truck drifting toward the shoulder. The sound of the rumble strips, those grooved edges of the highway that make a loud noise when you drive over them, shocked me back to full consciousness. My heart was pounding, adrenaline flooding my system as I corrected course and got back into my lane. "Jesus," I muttered, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "Stay awake, Kevin, stay awake." I tried all the usual tricks. I rolled down the windows, letting the cold night air blast into the cab. I turned the music back on, cranking the volume up loud. I started doing mental exercises, counting backwards from 100 by 7s. Reciting song lyrics, anything to keep my brain engaged. It helped, but only marginally. The exhaustion was too deep, too all-encompassing. That's when I remembered the smelling salts. My buddy Tristan had given them to me years ago, when I first started taking these long overnight hauls. He'd been a trucker for decades, had seen and done it all, and he'd shared a lot of wisdom with me over the years. The smelling salts were part of his emergency kit, along with water, energy bars, and a spare tire. Use them sparingly, he'd warned me. They'll wake you up, no question about that. But they're harsh, and they're not a substitute for actual rest. If you're using them more than once in a blue moon, you're pushing yourself too hard. I'd only used them once before, on a similarly desperate night drive through Wyoming. The effect had been immediate and intense. A burning sensation in my nose and throat, watering eyes, and a sudden rush of alertness that felt almost chemical in its intensity. It wasn't pleasant, but it was effective. I reached into the storage compartment between the seats and felt around until I found the small bottle. I unscrewed the cap, held it up to my nose, and took a deep breath of the ammonia-based crystals inside. The reaction was instant and violent. My head snapped back, tears streamed from my eyes. My sinuses burned like I'd inhaled fire. For a few seconds I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only experience the intense, overwhelming sensation of the smelling salts doing their job. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the sensation began to fade, leaving behind a crystal-clear alertness that was almost shocking in its completeness. I was awake, really, truly awake for the first time in hours. The exhaustion was still there, lurking at the edges of my consciousness, but it was pushed back, held at bay by the chemical cocktail now coursing through my system. I could do this. I could make it to Billings. I pressed down on the accelerator, picking up speed, determined to cover as much ground as possible while this artificial alertness lasted. The highway stretched out before me, empty and dark, cutting through the forest like a ribbon of asphalt through an ocean of trees. My headlights, which I really needed to upgrade but kept putting off, carved out a weak cone of visibility in the darkness ahead. That's when I saw it. A shape in the road ahead, maybe 200 yards distant. At first, I thought it might be an animal, a deer or an elk, both common in this area. I eased off the accelerator, not wanting to hit anything at highway speed. As I got closer, though, I could see that it wasn't an animal. It was something else. Something purple. My tired brain struggled to process what I was seeing. As my headlights finally illuminated it clearly, I realized it was a dress. A woman's dress, purple with some kind of pattern on it, lying in the middle of the road like someone had just dropped it there. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold air coming through the windows. This was wrong. This was very wrong. Why would there be a dress in the middle of a highway, in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere? I slowed down even more, crawling past the dress at maybe 20 miles an hour, my eyes scanning the surrounding darkness for any sign of what might have happened. Had there been an accident, a crime, a simple case of something falling out of someone's vehicle? None of the explanations that came to mind felt satisfactory. I should have stopped right there. Should have called 911, reported what I'd seen, let the authorities handle it. But I didn't. I kept driving, telling myself that it was probably nothing, that stopping would just delay my delivery, that I didn't have time to get involved in whatever situation had led to a dress being in the middle of the highway. About a quarter mile further down the road, I saw something else. A pair of shoes, women's shoes with heels, sitting neatly side by side on the center line like someone had carefully placed them there. The chill I'd felt earlier intensified into something approaching fear. One piece of clothing could be an accident, a fluke, something that fell out of a vehicle. But two suggested something deliberate, something planned. I slowed my truck to a crawl, my hazard lights now flashing as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. The shoes looked expensive, the kind you'd wear to a nice restaurant or a formal event. They were too nice to have been abandoned by accident. Someone had put them there, arranged them carefully, and then left. But where was that someone? I scanned the roadside looking for any sign of a person or a vehicle, but there was nothing except trees and darkness. The forest pressed in from both sides, thick and impenetrable in the night. If someone was out there, I couldn't see them. My training, the little voice of caution that had kept me alive and safe for 15 years on the road, was screaming at me to call the police and keep driving. Don't stop, don't investigate, don't get involved, just report it and move on. But there was another voice too, a more primal voice that was concerned about whoever might need help. What if someone had been in an accident? What if they were hurt, wandering around in the woods, unable to call for help? What if by driving past I was condemning them to a night in the cold Montana wilderness? I compromised by continuing to drive slowly, my eyes peeled for any other signs of what might have happened. If I saw more clothing, if I saw any indication that someone was in danger, I'd stop and investigate more thoroughly. But if this was just a weird coincidence, just some strange artifacts left by passing vehicles, I'd report it to the authorities and continue with my delivery. A few hundred yards further down the road, I got my answer. More clothes. A lot more clothes. There was a pile of them on the shoulder, visible in the glow of my headlights. Men's clothes, women's clothes, even what looked like children's clothing. Shirts and pants and jackets, all heaped together like someone had gone through their entire wardrobe and just tossed it out the window. I brought my truck to a complete stop, right there in the middle of the highway. My heart was pounding now, adrenaline mixing with the caffeine and the smelling salts to create a kind of hyper-alertness that made every sense feel amplified. Something was very, very wrong here. People don't just scatter clothes across a highway for no reason. This had to be connected to some kind of crime or emergency. I reached for my phone, intending to call 911, but paused. What would I even tell them? That I found some clothes on the highway? That didn't sound like an emergency, even though every instinct I had was telling me it was. They'd probably tell me to just continue on my way and they'd send someone to check it out in the morning. No, I needed more information. I needed to actually investigate, to see if there was any sign of what had happened here. Then I could call the police with a more complete picture of the situation. I put the truck in park and turned on my hazards, bathing the area in rhythmic amber light. I grabbed my flashlight, the good one I kept under the seat that could illuminate things 100 yards away. Then I opened my door and climbed down from the cab, my boots crunching on the gravel shoulder. The night air was cold and still, without even a breath of wind. That struck me as odd, though I couldn't quite articulate why. Montana nights usually had at least some breeze, especially in the spring. But tonight, the air was perfectly still, almost oppressively so. It felt like the entire world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I walked over to the pile of clothes, shining my flashlight beam over them, trying to understand what I was looking at. There were definitely children's clothes mixed in with the adult clothing. A small jacket with cartoon characters on it. Tiny shoes that couldn't have belonged to anyone older than 5 or 6. The sight of them made my stomach clench with worry. Where were the kids these clothes belonged to? I bent down to examine the pile more closely, being careful not to disturb anything in case this turned out to be a crime scene. The clothes were dry, not wet with rain or dew, which suggested they hadn't been here very long. Some of them looked expensive, designer brands that you wouldn't just throw away. This wasn't someone dumping old clothes they didn't want anymore. This was something else. I straightened up and swept my flashlight beam across the surrounding area, looking into the woods on either side of the highway. The trees were thick here, mostly pine and fir, their branches creating a dense canopy that blocked out what little moonlight there was. I couldn't see more than 20 or 30 feet into the forest before the darkness became impenetrable. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding strange and small in the vast silence. Is anyone out here? Do you need help? No response. Just that eerie, oppressive silence pressing in from all sides. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, listening intently for any sound. A voice calling back, footsteps, anything. But there was nothing. I was about to give up and call the police when I heard it. A sound from the woods to my left, deeper in the forest. It was hard to identify at first, muffled by distance and trees. But as I focused on it, as I really listened, I realized what it was: a child screaming. The sound of that scream hit me like a physical blow. It was high-pitched and terrified, the unmistakable sound of a child in distress. Every parental instinct I had, every protective impulse that had been dormant since my own kids had grown up and moved out, came roaring back to life. Someone's child was out there in those woods, scared and alone and crying for help. I didn't think, didn't pause to consider that this might be a trap or a trick. Didn't remember all the warnings about how criminals sometimes lure good Samaritans into dangerous situations. I just reacted, turning toward the sound and taking a step toward the tree line. That's when my training, my years of experience, my accumulated wisdom about staying safe on the road, finally kicked in and stopped me. Something about this whole situation felt wrong. The scattered clothes, the perfect stillness of the night, the convenient placement of everything right here on this particular stretch of empty highway. It was too perfect, too staged, like someone had set up a scene and was waiting for an audience. I stood there frozen, torn between the instinct to help and the instinct to protect myself. The scream came again, just as urgent, just as terrified. It was closer to the road than I'd initially thought, maybe only 50 or 60 yards into the woods. I could get there in less than a minute if I ran, but should I? I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. My hands were shaking, whether from exhaustion or adrenaline or fear I couldn't say. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. The scream came again, and this time I could hear something else in it, a desperate quality that made my chest tighten. 911, what's your emergency? I'm on Highway 94, about 40 miles east of Billings, I said, speaking quickly. There are clothes scattered all over the road, including children's clothes, and I can hear a child screaming in the woods. Someone needs help out here. Sir, can you see anyone? Can you see the child? No, they're in the woods. I can hear them, but I can't see them. Okay, sir, I need you to stay in your vehicle and stay on the line with me. Do not enter the woods. Officers are being dispatched to your location right now. But there's a child out there. They're screaming. I can't just... The scream came again, cutting me off. But this time, something about it sounded different. The pitch was the same, the volume was the same, but there was something artificial about it. Something not quite human. It was like listening to a recording of a scream rather than an actual scream. Sir, are you still there? I didn't answer. I was too busy processing what I just realized. That wasn't a real child screaming. It couldn't be. Real screams don't sound exactly the same each time. Real screams have variation, have emotion that changes from moment to moment. What I was hearing was a recording, being played from somewhere in the woods. This was a trap. Someone was trying to lure me into those woods using a recording of a child screaming. The clothes scattered on the road, the dress, the shoes, all of it was bait designed to make me stop and investigate. And I'd almost fallen for it. I'm here, I said into the phone, my voice shaking. But I don't think that's a real child. I think someone is playing a recording. Sir, regardless of what it is, I need you to return to your vehicle and wait for officers to arrive. Can you do that for me? I started backing away from the tree line. My flashlight still pointed toward the woods, suddenly very aware of how exposed I was standing out here on the shoulder of the highway. If someone was in those woods, if someone had set this trap, they could see me right now. They could be watching me, waiting for their chance. I made it about halfway back to my truck when I heard a new sound. Not a scream this time, but a rustling in the undergrowth, like something large was moving through the brush. It was coming from the same direction as the screams, from deeper in the forest, and it was getting closer. "Someone's in the woods," I said into the phone, not caring that I was probably stating the obvious. "Someone's coming toward the road. Get to your vehicle, sir. Get to your vehicle right now." I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and ran, my boots slapping against the pavement, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly as I moved. Behind me, I could hear the rustling getting louder, could hear branches snapping and leaves crunching under what sounded like multiple sets of feet. There was more than one person in those woods, maybe several people. I reached my truck and grabbed the door handle, yanking it open with enough force that I almost pulled it off its hinges. I threw myself into the cab and slammed the door shut, hitting the lock button immediately. Only then, with steel and glass between me and whatever was out there, did I feel even marginally safe. "I'm in the truck," I gasped into the phone. "I'm locked in." "Good. Stay there. Officers are approximately 8 minutes from your location." 8 minutes. That didn't sound like very long in abstract terms, but sitting in a truck on a dark highway with unknown threats lurking in the nearby woods, 8 minutes felt like an eternity. I sat there with my hands locked on the steering wheel, my eyes darting between the mirrors and the windshield, trying to see what was out there. The rustling sounds had stopped. The screaming had stopped. Everything was silent again, that same oppressive, unnatural silence that had unnerved me when I first stopped. It was like whatever was out there was also waiting, also watching, trying to decide what to do next. Then I saw movement, not in the woods, but on the road. A figure had stepped out from the tree line and was standing maybe 30 yards behind my truck, illuminated by my taillights and hazard lights. It was a man, I could tell that much, but I couldn't make out any details from this distance. He was just standing there, not moving, not approaching, just watching my truck. "There's someone on the road," I told the 911 operator. "Behind my truck, a man. Can you describe him?" "It's too dark. I can just see a silhouette." We stayed like that for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds. Him standing there watching, me sitting in my truck trying to decide what to do. Should I drive away? Should I stay put and wait for the police? Should I try to get a better look at him? The decision was made for me when I saw something that made my blood run cold. The man raised his right hand, and in it was a long, dark object. Even from this distance, even in the poor lighting, I could tell what it was. A rifle. "He has a gun!" I shouted into the phone. "He's got a rifle!" "Do not engage, sir. Put your truck in gear and drive away from the scene. Officers will intercept you further down the road." I didn't need to be told twice. My hand was already reaching for the gear shift, my foot already pressing down on the accelerator. But before I could get the truck moving, something happened that I still don't fully understand. The man with the rifle took a few steps forward, getting into better light from my truck's hazards. And that's when I got my first clear look at him. He was short, maybe 5'6", with a stocky build. He was wearing overalls and work boots, and he was holding what looked like a small camping shovel in his left hand, along with that rifle in his right. But what struck me most was his expression. He didn't look threatening or aggressive. He looked worried, almost desperate. He raised his left hand, the one with the shovel, and started waving it over his head. His mouth was moving, like he was shouting something, but I couldn't hear what through the closed windows and over the sound of my idling engine. "Wait!" I heard faintly. Wait, don't go. Was this guy seriously trying to get me to stop after everything that had just happened? After the trap with the clothes and the fake screaming? After he'd come out of the woods with a gun? What kind of insane logic was that? I threw the truck into gear and pressed down hard on the accelerator. The rig lurched forward, picking up speed quickly. In my side mirror, I watched the man take a few running steps after me, still waving his hand, still shouting something I couldn't hear. Then he stopped, turned, and ran back toward the woods. I kept my foot pressed to the floor, pushing the truck faster than I should have on this winding mountain highway, not caring about the speed limit or safety or anything, except putting distance between myself and whatever the hell that had been. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it over the sound of the engine. My hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. Every shadow, every dark patch alongside the road made me flinch, made me think something was about to jump out in front of me. Sir, are you still there?" The 911 operator's voice brought me back to the moment. "Yeah, I'm here. I'm driving. I'm getting away from there." "Good. Continue east on Highway 94. You should see flashing lights in approximately 3 minutes. Those are our officers coming to meet you." 3 minutes. I could do 3 minutes. I focused on the road ahead, on the white lines marking the lanes, on the simple act of driving and not thinking about what had just happened. But my mind wouldn't cooperate. It kept replaying those moments over and over. The scattered clothes, the recorded scream, the man with the rifle, the desperate look on his face. What had that been? What was that man doing out there? Why set up such an elaborate trap? And if it was a trap, why had he looked so worried when I'd driven away? The questions spiraled through my tired brain, finding no purchase, no answers that made sense. I'd been on the road for 15 years, had seen and experienced a lot of strange things, but nothing like this. This was beyond strange. This was terrifying in a way I couldn't quite articulate. True to the operator's word, I saw flashing blue and red lights ahead after about 3 minutes of driving. 2 police cruisers were approaching from the opposite direction, and they crossed the median to pull in behind me. I slowed down and pulled onto the shoulder, putting the truck in park but keeping the engine running. I wasn't getting out of this cab until I was sure it was safe. One of the officers approached my driver's side window, and I rolled it down about halfway. He was young, probably in his late 20s, with short brown hair and a serious expression. "Are you the trucker who called 911? He asked. "Yeah, that's me, Kevin Morrison." "I'm Deputy Harris. Are you injured? Did anyone harm you?" "No, I'm fine, just scared. There was a man back there with a gun, and someone was playing a recording of a child screaming, and there were clothes all over the road." The words were tumbling out faster than I could organize them, and I had to stop and take a breath. "Okay, Mr. Morrison, I need you to calm down and tell me exactly what happened, from the beginning." So I did. I told him about the dress, the shoes, the pile of clothes with children's clothing mixed in. I told him about the screaming that turned out to be a recording. I told him about the man with the rifle and the shovel who'd emerged from the woods. I told him everything I could remember, trying to be as detailed and accurate as possible. Deputy Harris listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes in a small notebook. When I finished, he looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "And this man, the one with the rifle, did he point it at you? Did he make any threatening moves? He had it in his hand, but no, he didn't point it at me. He actually looked like he wanted me to stop, like he was trying to flag me down or something. But I wasn't going to stick around to find out what he wanted." "You did the right thing," Deputy Harris said. "We're going to head back to that location and investigate. In the meantime, I need you to follow Officer Rodriguez here." He gestured to the second police car. "To the station in Billings. We'll need a full statement from you, and we may have some follow-up questions." But I have a delivery to make. I'm supposed to be in Billings by 7 this morning, and I'm already behind schedule. I understand, but this is a potential criminal matter. We need your cooperation. It shouldn't take more than an hour or two. I wanted to argue, wanted to insist that I couldn't afford the delay, that my job depended on making this delivery on time. But I also understood that what I'd witnessed was serious. Someone had set up an elaborate trap on a public highway, using children's clothing and fake distress calls to lure in victims. That was the kind of thing that could get people killed. I had a responsibility to help the police figure out what was going on. "Okay," I said. "Lead the way." The Billings police station was a modern, efficient-looking building on the north side of town. I followed Officer Rodriguez into the parking lot and found a spot for my rig, then followed him inside. Despite the late hour, it was now after 2 in the morning, the station was bustling with activity. Officers were coming and going, phones were ringing, and there was a general sense of organized chaos that suggested something big was happening. Officer Rodriguez led me to a small interview room and asked me to wait. The room was exactly what you'd expect from 1,000 police procedurals on TV. Plain walls painted in institutional beige, a metal table bolted to the floor, uncomfortable chairs, and a large mirror on one wall that was obviously two-way glass. I sat down, suddenly aware of how exhausted I was. The adrenaline that had been keeping me going was starting to wear off, and the exhaustion underneath was crushing. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, someone was gently shaking my shoulder. I jerked awake, my heart racing, momentarily disoriented about where I was. A woman in plain clothes was standing next to me, a concerned expression on her face. "Mr. Morrison, I'm Detective Barnes. Sorry to startle you. You looked like you needed the rest." I rubbed my eyes and tried to focus. Detective Barnes appeared to be in her 40s with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and sharp, intelligent eyes. She was holding a cup of coffee, which she set down in front of me. "Thought you might need this," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "It's terrible coffee, but it's hot and it has caffeine." "Thank you," I said, wrapping my hands around the cup. The warmth felt good. "Have you found anything? Did you catch the guy?" Detective Barnes's expression became more serious. "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about. We've investigated the scene, and we need to ask you some questions about what you saw." "Okay. What do you want to know?" "Let's start with the location. You said you saw the first piece of clothing, the purple dress, at approximately what mile marker?" I tried to think back, tried to remember if I'd noticed any mile markers. "I don't know exactly. It was maybe 20 or 30 miles east of here. I wasn't really paying attention to the markers at that point." "And how far apart were the various pieces of clothing? The dress, then the shoes, then the larger pile?" "The dress and the shoes were maybe a quarter mile apart. The pile was another quarter mile or so after that. Why?" Detective Barnes didn't answer my question. Instead, she pulled out a tablet and swiped through some photos. "I'm going to show you some images from the scene. I need you to tell me if this is what you saw." She turned the tablet toward me. The first photo showed a highway at night, illuminated by police floodlights. I could see the double yellow line, the shoulder, and the tree line beyond. But there was no clothing visible anywhere in the frame. "That's the location?" I asked. "According to the coordinates from your 911 call, yes. This is where you reported seeing the pile of clothing. But there's nothing there." "Exactly." She swiped to another photo. "This is approximately a quarter mile west, where you said you saw the shoes." Again, an empty highway. No shoes, no clothing, nothing. "I don't understand," I said, feeling a cold knot forming in my stomach. They were there. I saw them, the dress, the shoes, the pile of clothes with the children's clothing mixed in. I saw all of it. Mr. Morrison, we have thoroughly searched the entire area you described. We used police dogs. We had officers walking the shoulders and checking the tree line. We even had a helicopter with thermal imaging fly over the area. We found no clothing, no evidence of any clothing, nothing. I stared at her, unable to process what she was telling me. That's impossible. I saw it. I stopped my truck and got out and looked at the pile. I was standing maybe 10 feet away from it. We did find evidence that a vehicle had stopped at that location. There were tire marks that matched the type of tires on your truck, and we found your footprints on the shoulder, right where you said you'd gotten out to investigate. But there was no clothing, Mr. Morrison. Nothing. Then someone removed it. The man with the rifle, he must have gone back and picked it all up after I drove away. That's possible, Detective Barnes conceded. But that would have required significant time and effort. You drove away and immediately encountered our officers, correct? 3 minutes, according to the timeline. Something like that, yeah. So, this individual would have had, at most, 3 or 4 minutes to collect dozens of pieces of clothing scattered over several hundred yards of highway, then disappear back into the woods before our officers arrived at the scene. Does that seem realistic to you? I wanted to say yes. Wanted to insist that it was possible, that someone could have done that if they were fast and motivated. But even as I was formulating the argument, I knew how weak it sounded. 3 minutes wasn't enough time to collect that much clothing, especially not in the dark. What about the recording? I asked. The fake child screaming? You must have found the device that was playing it. We found no such device. We searched the woods extensively, particularly in the area where you said you heard the sounds originating from. Nothing. The cold knot in my stomach was growing, spreading through my chest. I heard it. I know I heard it. It was a child screaming, or at least a recording of one. I believe you, Detective Barnes said, and her tone was gentle, almost sympathetic. I believe you heard something and saw something, but I'm trying to understand what that something was. What are you saying? You think I made it up? That I hallucinated the whole thing? Mr. Morrison, how long had you been driving before you encountered the clothing? I don't know. Since 7:30 or 8 that evening. So, approximately 6 hours of continuous driving at that point? Yeah, something like that. And you told Officer Harris that you'd used smelling salts to stay awake, is that correct? I felt my face flush. I was tired. I needed something to keep me alert. How many times had you used them that night? Just once. Maybe an hour before I saw the dress. Detective Barnes made a note on her tablet. Mr. Morrison, I'm going to be frank with you. Smelling salts, especially ammonia-based ones, can have neurological effects when used in conjunction with extreme fatigue. They can cause confusion, visual disturbances, even hallucinations in some cases. I wasn't hallucinating, I said, my voice rising. I know what I saw. There were clothes on that highway, and there was a man with a rifle, and someone was playing a recording of a child screaming. The man with the rifle, Detective Barnes said, pulling up another image on her tablet. Can you describe him again? As much detail as you can remember. I closed my eyes, trying to visualize him. Short, maybe 5'6", stocky build, red hair, I think, though it was hard to tell in that lighting. He was wearing overalls and work boots. He had a small shovel in one hand and what looked like a hunting rifle in the other. And his facial features? Can you describe those? I tried, but the details wouldn't come into focus. I could remember the general impression, the worried expression, the desperate quality to his movements, but the specific features of his face remained frustratingly vague. Had he had a beard? I thought maybe, but I couldn't be sure. What color were his eyes? No idea. The more I tried to remember details, the more they slipped away, like trying to hold on to a dream after waking. I can't, I admitted finally. It was dark, and I only saw him clearly for a few seconds. But I know I saw him. He was real. Detective Barnes was quiet for a long moment, studying me with those sharp, intelligent eyes. Finally, she said, "Mr. Morrison, I'm not trying to attack you or suggest you're lying, but I think we need to consider the possibility that what you experienced was a fatigue-induced episode. You'd been driving for hours. You were exhausted. You'd used smelling salts to stay awake. Those are all factors that can affect perception and cognition. So, you're saying I imagined the whole thing? I'm saying that your brain, under extreme stress and deprivation, may have interpreted ambiguous stimuli as something more concrete than it actually was. Maybe there was a piece of trash on the road that looked like a dress in your headlights. Maybe an animal in the woods made a sound that your tired brain interpreted as a child screaming, and the man with the rifle might have been a combination of shadows and expectations." I wanted to argue with her, wanted to insist that I knew the difference between reality and hallucination, that I wasn't so far gone that I'd imagine an entire scene, complete with props and a human antagonist. But doubt was creeping in, working its way through my certainty like water through cracks in concrete. Had I really seen those things? Or had my exhausted, chemically altered brain filled in details that weren't actually there? I'd been so tired, beyond tired really, functioning on fumes and chemicals and sheer stubbornness. Was it possible that I'd experienced some kind of breakdown? That the whole incident was a product of my own failing mind rather than an external threat? "I need you to understand something," Detective Barnes continued. "This isn't uncommon. We see it fairly regularly with long-haul drivers who push themselves too hard. The isolation, the fatigue, the monotony of the highway, it all adds up. And when you throw in stimulants or other chemicals, well, things can get strange." "But I called 911, I said weakly. "The operator heard me describe what was happening. You called 911 and reported what you believed you were seeing and hearing. That's not in dispute, but it doesn't necessarily mean those things were objectively real." I sat there in that interview room, holding my terrible coffee, trying to wrap my mind around what she was telling me. Had I really experienced some kind of fatigue-induced hallucination? Had I put myself in danger, called in the police, disrupted my delivery schedule, all because my brain had manufactured a threat that didn't actually exist? The more I thought about it, the more plausible it seemed. The convenience of the scene, the way everything had been laid out like props in a stage play, the fact that nothing remained when the police arrived, the vagueness of my memories when asked for specific details. It all pointed toward Detective Barnes's explanation being the correct one. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you go complete your delivery if you still can, and then you go home and you get some real rest. And Mr. Morrison, I strongly suggest you reconsider your approach to this job. What you experienced tonight, whether it was real or not, is a warning sign. Your body and mind were telling you that you'd pushed too far. Next time you might not be so lucky." She stood up and gestured towards the door. "You're free to go. We'll file this as an unverified report, and we'll keep an eye on that stretch of highway for a while, just in case. But I think we're done here." I followed her out of the interview room, through the bustling station, and out to the parking lot where my truck was waiting. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. A new day was beginning, and I'd spent the entire night driving and then sitting in a police station being told that I'd hallucinated a terrifying incident. I climbed into my truck, started the engine, and just sat there for a while. I still had a delivery to make, though I was now several hours behind schedule and would almost certainly face penalties for the delay. But more than that, I had some serious thinking to do about my career, my choices, and whether I was willing to keep pushing myself the way I had been. I completed the delivery in Billings, arriving at the distribution center just before 9 in the morning. The receiving manager was not happy about the delay, and he let me know it in no uncertain terms. I apologized, explained that there had been a police emergency, and took my reprimand without arguing. What was the point? I couldn't exactly tell him that I'd lost 3 hours because I'd maybe hallucinated a crime scene on the highway. After the delivery, I found a motel and crashed hard. I slept for 14 hours straight, the kind of deep, dreamless sleep that comes after your body and mind have been pushed past their breaking point. When I finally woke up, it was late at night and I felt groggy and disoriented, like I'd been drugged. I ordered room service, ate mechanically without tasting anything, and then lay in bed staring at the ceiling and thinking about what had happened. The thing about doubt is that once it gets its hooks into you, it's almost impossible to shake. Before my conversation with Detective Barnes, I'd been certain about what I'd experienced. Absolutely, completely certain. I'd seen the clothes, heard the screaming, encountered the man with the rifle. Those were facts, as real and solid as the truck I drove or the bed I was lying in. But now I wasn't certain about anything. Every time I tried to recall the details of that night, they seemed to shift and blur, like trying to remember a dream. The purple dress. Had it really been purple, or was I just assuming that because Detective Barnes had mentioned I'd described it as purple? The pile of clothes. Had there really been children's clothing mixed in, or had my tired brain added that detail to make the situation seem more urgent, more dangerous? And the man with the rifle, the one who'd looked so worried and desperate. The more I tried to visualize his face, the less clear it became. Had he been real, or had he been a shadow, a tree branch, a trick of the light that my exhausted mind had interpreted as a human figure? I wanted to believe I hadn't hallucinated it. I wanted to trust my own perceptions and memories. But I also had to acknowledge that I'd been in no condition to trust those perceptions. I'd been awake for over 24 hours, I'd driven for 11 hours straight, and I'd inhaled ammonia-based smelling salts to stay conscious. Those weren't conditions that led to reliable observations. The next day, I called Pete, my dispatcher, and told him I needed some time off. I expected him to argue, to tell me that I was under contract and had deliveries scheduled, but instead he was surprisingly understanding. "Kevin, I heard about what happened," he said. "The police called me to verify your employment and your schedule. Are you okay?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I think maybe I pushed myself too hard." "Yeah, I think maybe you did. Look, take a week. Take 2 weeks if you need them. I'll redistribute your loads to other drivers. Just focus on getting your head straight." "Thanks, Pete. I appreciate it." I spent those 2 weeks at home in Fargo, trying to process what had happened and figure out what to do next. I read articles about fatigue-induced hallucinations, about the effects of sleep deprivation on cognitive function, about the ways that stimulants can interact with exhaustion to create false perceptions. The more I read, the more convinced I became that Detective Barnes had been right. I'd experienced some kind of episode, a break from reality brought on by pushing my body and mind too far. But a small part of me, a stubborn, nagging voice in the back of my mind, wouldn't let it go. That voice kept insisting that what I'd seen had been real. That voice kept asking why the police hadn't found any evidence if someone had really set up an elaborate trap on that highway. That voice kept wondering if maybe, just maybe, I'd stumbled onto something that someone had gone to great lengths to cover up. I tried talking to Tristan about it, my old mentor who'd been driving trucks for decades. We met for coffee at a diner in Fargo, and I laid out the whole story for him. He listened without interrupting, his weathered face thoughtful as I described the clothes, the screaming, the man with the rifle. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Kevin, I'm going to tell you something that might not make you feel better. I've been driving for 35 years. In that time, I've seen some strange shit out on those highways. Things I can't explain, things that don't make sense, and I've known other drivers who've seen things too. Things that disappear before anyone else can verify them. You think I really saw something? That it wasn't just fatigue?" "I think it doesn't matter," Tristan said. "Whether you saw something real or whether your brain manufactured it, the result is the same. You were in a state where you couldn't trust your own perceptions. And that's dangerous, Kevin. That's how people die out there. So, what do? You make a choice. Either you change how you approach this job, or you find a different job. Because if you keep pushing yourself the way you have been, eventually, something bad is going to happen. Maybe you'll fall asleep at the wheel and crash. Maybe you'll have another episode and end up somewhere you shouldn't be. Maybe you'll be fine for years and then one day you'll just break. But something will happen, Kevin. That's a guarantee." His words hit me hard because I knew he was right. I'd been living on borrowed time, operating at a level of exhaustion and stress that wasn't sustainable. The incident on Highway 94, whether it was real or hallucinated, was my wake-up call. I could either heed it or ignore it, but I couldn't pretend it hadn't happened. I made some changes. I started turning down the overnight runs, the rush jobs, the loads that required pushing through exhaustion to make the deadline. I started planning my routes better, building in adequate time for rest stops and meals. I threw away the smelling salts and committed to never using them again. If I was too tired to drive safely, I'd pull over and sleep. Consequences be damned. My income took a hit. Without the premium pay for overnight and rush deliveries, I was making maybe 30% less than I had been. But I was also sleeping better, feeling more alert, living a more sustainable lifestyle. The stress that had been my constant companion for years started to ease up. I found that I actually enjoyed driving again, appreciated the landscapes I was passing through, felt more connected to the world around me. About 6 months after the incident, I got a call from Detective Barnes. She told me that there had been another report from the same area where I'd seen the clothes and heard the screaming. A family driving through late at night had called 911 to report seeing what looked like a person lying on the side of the road. When police investigated, they found nothing. No person, no evidence that anyone had been there. "I thought you'd want to know," she said. "It doesn't prove anything one way or another. Could be another case of fatigued drivers seeing things that aren't there. Could be something else. But I wanted you to know you weren't alone in experiencing something strange on that stretch of highway." After we hung up, I sat with that information for a while. Another report from the same area, another sighting that couldn't be verified. It could mean I wasn't crazy, that there really was something happening on that highway. Or it could mean that particular stretch of road, with its isolation and darkness and long straight sections that lulled drivers into a kind of hypnotic state, was particularly conducive to fatigue-induced hallucinations. I realized it didn't matter which explanation was true. What mattered was that I'd learned my lesson. I'd learned the limits of my own endurance and the importance of respecting those limits. I'd learned that the money and the pride and the reputation weren't worth risking my life or my sanity. 4 years have passed since that night. 4 years of driving more carefully, resting more regularly, living a more balanced life. I'm still a trucker, still hauling freight across the country, but I'm a different kind of trucker than I was before. I'm the guy who actually follows the regulations about rest periods. I'm the guy who'll turn down a load if the schedule is unrealistic. I'm the guy who pulls over when he's tired instead of pushing through. Some of the younger drivers, the ones who still think they're invincible, they look at me like I'm getting soft. They take the loads I turn down. They drive the hours I won't drive. They pride themselves on their willingness to push harder than anyone else. I see myself in them, see the same stubborn pride and misplaced priorities that defined my earlier career. Sometimes I try to warn them. I tell them about the night on Highway 94, about the clothes and the screaming and the man with the rifle. I tell them about the hours spent in a police station being told I'd hallucinated the whole thing. I tell them about the doubt that still lingers, the uncertainty about what's real and what's manufactured by an exhausted mind. Most of them don't listen. They're like I was, convinced that they're different, that the rules don't apply to them, that they can handle anything the job throws at them. A few of them, though, a precious few, they hear something in my story that resonates. They see the cautionary tale for what it is, and maybe, just maybe, they make different choices than I did. I still drive through that section of Highway 94 sometimes when my routes take me between North Dakota and Montana. I always make sure to drive it during the day, when I'm well rested and alert. I look at the tree line as I pass, at the places where the woods press close to the road, and I try to identify the spot where it happened. But the highway all looks the same along that stretch, and I've never been able to pinpoint the exact location. Sometimes I wonder if the man with the rifle was real. If somewhere out there in those Montana woods there's a person who remembers that night as clearly as I do. Someone who set up an elaborate trap for reasons I'll never understand, and who watched as a trucker almost fell for it before driving away. Someone who cleaned up all the evidence in the few minutes before the police arrived, who disappeared back into the forest and was never caught. Other times, I'm convinced Detective Barnes was right, that I experienced a fatigue-induced hallucination brought on by exhaustion and chemicals, that the clothes and the screaming and the man were all products of my own failing mind, shadows and sounds interpreted as something more concrete than they actually were. The truth is, I'll never know for certain what happened that night, and I've made peace with that uncertainty. What matters isn't whether the threat was real or imagined. What matters is that I was in a state where I couldn't tell the difference, and that's a dangerous place to be. The incident, whether it was real or not, showed me that I needed to change. And I did change. That's the important part. My youngest daughter is in college now, using the money I've saved over the years. My ex-wife and I are on better terms than we've been in years. I'm in better physical shape, sleeping better, feeling more like myself than I have in decades. These are all good things, positive changes that came from a negative experience. I still tell the story sometimes, at truck stops and rest areas, to other drivers who'll listen. I tell it as a cautionary tale, a warning about the dangers of pushing yourself too hard. I tell them about the clothes scattered on the highway, the recorded screaming from the woods, the man with the rifle who might or might not have been real. And I tell them about the lesson I learned, that no load is worth your life, no deadline is worth your sanity, no amount of money is worth losing your grip on reality. Some people think I'm exaggerating, making up details to make the story more dramatic. Some think I'm completely crazy, that the whole thing was obviously a hallucination and I should just admit it. But a few, the ones who've been out there on those lonely highways late at night, the ones who felt their own grip on reality start to slip when they've been driving too long. They understand. They know that whether the threat was real or imagined, it was real to me in that moment. And that's what matters. The highway stretches out before me, just like it does every day. Somewhere behind me is the past, the mistakes, the lessons learned the hard way. Somewhere ahead is the future, uncertain, but navigable. And here I am in the present, older and wiser and more careful, still driving but driving differently, still working but with better boundaries, still living but with greater awareness of my own limitations. I don't have all the answers. I don't know what happened that night on Highway 94. Was it a real threat or a hallucination? Was there a man with a rifle, or just shadows and exhaustion? I'll probably never know, but I know I survived it. I know I learned from it, and I know I'm a better driver, a better person, because of it. That has to be enough. And for me, 4 years later, it finally is.